You're unmuted.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. This meeting will come to order. Welcome to the June 10th, 2023 regular meeting of the Land Use and Transportation Committee of the San Francisco Board of Supervisors. I'm Supervisor Mirna Melgar, Chair of the committee, joined by Vice Chair Supervisor Dean Preston and Board of Supervisors President Aaron Peskin. The committee clerk today is Erica Major. I would also like to acknowledge the good folks at SFGov TV for staffing us during this meeting. Madam Clerk, do you have any announcements?
Yes, thank you. The Board of Supervisors and its committees are now convening hybrid meetings that allow in-person attendance and public comment while still providing remote access and public comment via telephone. Public comment will be taken on each item on this agenda. Those attending in person will be allowed to speak first, and then we will move on to a remote call-in line. When connected, you will hear the meeting discussions, but you will be muted and in listening mode only. When your item of interest comes up and public comment is called, those joining us in person should line up to the right near the curtains, and those on the telephone line should press *3 to be added to the queue. If you're on your telephone, please remember to turn down your television and all listening devices you may be using. You may also submit written comments to myself, the Land Use and Transportation Clerk. My email address is erica.major@sfgov.org. You may also send written comments via U.S. Postal Service to our office at City Hall. The address is 1 Dr. Carlton B. Goodlett Place, Room 244, San Francisco, California, 94102. Finally, items acted upon today are expected to appear on the Board of Supervisors agenda of July 18th, unless otherwise stated. Madam Chair?
Thank you very much, Madam Clerk. Please call item number 1.
Item number 1 is an ordinance amending the Park Code to authorize the Recreation and Park Commission to cause the Park Code to apply to specified properties. It has authorized the Recreation and Park Department to lease or operate for recreational purposes. Members of the public who wish to provide public comment should press *3 now, and you'll hear the system indicate that you have raised your hand in confirmation. Madam Chair?
Thank you very much, Madam Clerk. Colleagues, this item was continued from our previous meeting as there are a number of questions still outstanding. We do have Rec Park staff on the line if we have any additional questions, but I will be making a motion to continue this item to the call of the chair to allow us more time for this conversation. After the past meeting, when this was on the agenda, my office was contacted by Poder, the people organizing to demand environmental rights, and they have a program at Hummingbird Farm at McLaren Park, and they had a lot of questions about the relationship with Rec and Park Department, which would be new for them. Right now, their relationship is with a PUC and the ensuing, fees that would be paid, as well as other organizations. There's still a lot of questions about what this would mean, and I would like to give the department and the public some time to figure out what the answers are to the questions that we asked them last time, and anybody in the public. So if that's okay, I am making that motion. And let's go to public comment first.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Are there any members of the public who would like to speak for item number 1? Please approach the podium and line up to your right. Those online, now's your time to press *3 to join the queue. You have 2 minutes. Please begin.
Thank you, committee. Appreciate it. I was just listening to you, and this item here, I'm concerned about it. What I'm concerned about in particular is the park code, and if we can get some clarity on how it's going to be when it comes out. Because right now it doesn't really make any, it's not really hitting home for me. Well, additionally, the ramp slope is at 110. The ramp slope at the parks, are they at 110 also? Is this item going to speak to that? Are we going to have somebody come and talk to us about it? Because right now it doesn't seem like anybody is. So I just want some clarity on that, really, for you to pay attention to that and then let us know if that's going to happen or not. Additionally, I was also concerned about the Park Commission and Rec and Park you know, what are they doing? What's going on here? You know, so we want to know those things. So if that's going to happen, let me know, and then we can move forward and get through it together. We can hold hands and get through it, because right now I can't understand anything. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Are there any other members that would like to speak on item number 1? Seeing none, we'll move to our remote call-in line. We have 3 listeners today with 1 person in the queue. Let's take that caller, Jaime.
Great. David Pilpel. I made some comments the last time this was at the committee. I hope that they will be taken into consideration. I'm happy to communicate with the Office of Supervisor Melgar further on that. I support the continuance to the call of the chair. Thanks for listening.
Thank you so much for your comments. And that completes the queue, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Madam Clerk. So I have made a motion.
And on that motion, moved by Supervisor Melgar to continue to the call of chair. Supervisor Peskin? Peskin, aye. Supervisor Preston? Preston, aye. Supervisor Melgar?
Aye.
Melgar, aye. You have 3 ayes.
Thank you. That motion passes. Madam Clerk, please call item number 2.
Would you like me to call 2 and 3 together? 2, 3, and 4, rather?
Yes. Sorry.
Item
Thank
number
you.
2 is an ordinance amending the zoning map of the planning code to rezone certain waterfront parcels from P public to M1 light industrial, and to add waterfront special use district number 4 covering areas east of Mission Bay. Item number 3 is an ordinance amending the recreation and open space element of Central Waterfront Area Plan and Northeastern Waterfront Area Plan of the General Plan to maintain consistency with the Port of San Francisco's waterfront plan update. Item number 4 is an ordinance amending the planning code to revise certain waterfront special use district controls and to add waterfront special use district number 4 covering areas east of Mission Bay and southern waterfront areas, and making appropriate findings for all 3. Members of the public who wish to provide public comment on items 2, 3, and 4, now is your time to press star 3 to be added to the queue. The system prompt will indicate that you have raised your hand in confirmation. Madam Chair?
Thank you so much. We have Mr. Snyder here. Thank you for joining us. Please go ahead.
Okay, great. Good afternoon, supervisors. I'm Matt Snyder of Planning Department staff. Joining me today is Lily Langlois, also from the Planning Department, and Diane Oshima from the Port of San Francisco. Before you this afternoon is the approval of general plan, planning code, and map amendments associated with the Port's waterfront plan update. This waterfront plan update was approved by the Port Commission on April 11th. Our commission recommended approval of the 3 ordinances that are before you today on April 20th. For today's presentation, I'm just going to give a quick background of the waterfront plan to provide some context, and then I'll go into each of the ordinances and each of the actions that are before you. So very quickly, the waterfront plan, again, serves as the Port of San Francisco's major policy document regarding development along its 7.5-mile waterfront. The plan, originally called the Waterfront Land Use Plan, was created per the requirements of Prop H and then completed in 1997. Less than 20 years after its initial approval, the Port Commission asked staff to update the plan given the extensive development that had occurred since its original approval and to bring the plan up to date. After an extensive public engagement process, the Port Commission set forth 140 recommendations to update the plan and expand its context to include transportation, sustainability, resilience, and public participation, among other topics, thus it becoming the waterfront plan from the Waterfront Land Use Plan. The first ordinance that I'm going to describe is the general plan amendments. As a part of the process to update the waterfront plan, Port staff and planning staff worked together to perform a thorough analysis of all relevant elements and area plans of the general plan to see what objectives and policies and text needed to be updated so that the waterfront plan on one hand and the general plan were in alignment with city policy going forward. For those relevant area plans and elements that were determined to be needed to be updated, planning also looked beyond the waterfront plan to see what other changes in legislation or planning processes had occurred since their respective elements had last been updated, and to provide provide further supported updates. Where appropriate, staff look to update language around inclusion, sustainability, and resilience. So the two area plans that were relevant to the port and for which further community engagement was not planned, so I should just also mention that the port had agreed to work with the planning for those elements that were in its work program, the housing element, the sustainability that you had recently approved, along with the transportation that's currently in our work program and others that will be coming up. The ones that were not in our work plan that were relevant to the port were the Northeastern Waterfront Area Plan, which has not had a major update since 1998 when it was updated for the original Waterfront Land Use Plan, and the Central Waterfront Plan, which was originally adopted in 2008 as a part of the Eastern Neighborhoods. The one element that is not currently on the department's work plan and is relevant is the recreation and open space element. I'll describe each of these in the following slides. So first up, the Northeastern Waterfront Area Plan. This area plan was initially adopted in 1967, and one of the general plans, perhaps its oldest area plans. Its initial intent was to protect maritime uses and to protect against encroachment of larger scale development from adjacent neighborhoods. Again, this area plan was substantially updated in 1998 with the adoption of the original Waterfront Land Use Plan. But because so much has changed in the last 20 years, staff is recommending fairly extensive amendments to this plan. And we should just mention that while extensive, we're not describing them as significant. They're simply largely describing the context in which the policies and objectives going forward can be described. And so most of them just simply describe these development changes, everything from Jefferson Street to the ballpark. Language continues to emphasize maritime activity while providing language consistent with the waterfront plan that is more expansive. For an example, an emphasis on water transportation and access, further emphasis on water recreation, less on cargo. With the inclusion of the transportation chapter in the waterfront plan, language around transportation has also been updated to emphasize multimodal transportation and the need to balance competing transportation needs. As currently written, the plan does not address resilience at all, so language has been added to emphasize the need for ongoing resilience planning and the engagement of the community. It refers to the port's waterfront resilience program. Similarly, the plan, as currently written, refers to its users largely as adjacent residents and describes its history beginning with the Western European settlement. Language has been added to more inclusively, to describe more inclusively the users of the Northeastern waterfront and to provide a broader context of its history. The existing Northeast, the plan includes objectives and policies for the currently for the Rincon Point and South Beach areas, which are no longer within the boundaries of this area plan, but are instead in the East Soma area plan, so those objectives and policies are proposed to be removed. The next area plan that we're looking to make amendments is the Central Waterfront Area Plan. Again, this was approved in 2008 as a part of the Eastern Neighborhoods. And it's similar to the proposed amendments I just described. The Central Waterfront Plan updates largely describe public and private development activity that has occurred since its adoption. This includes the development agreement projects within the area, Pier 70 and the Potrero Power Station. Also with other projects such as at Aslayas Creek, with the publication of the Aslayas Creek Southeast Mobility Adaptation Study. The revision reflects the recent removal of the previous life science special use districts that had existed in the northern portion of the plan area. Language has been updated to reflect ongoing MTA planning, and similar to the Northeastern Waterfront Plan, resilience language has been added throughout. And the one element that we're looking to make amendments to is the recreation and open space element. And again, these are very similar in nature, largely to reflect changes in developments with some references to updated policy documents. And again, just mentioning the DA projects in the southeastern southeastern waterfront and the open space that is associated with it. Other Rec and Park projects have been updated, including that for India Basin Shoreline Park. And then reference to policy documents have also been updated accordingly, including the city's climate action plan, amongst others. So that concludes our description of the general plan amendments. I'll go on to a description of the planning code special use district amendments. Planning and port staff is also proposing amendments to Planning Code Section 240, which is the waterfront special use district. This code section establishes the design review process for properties under the ownership and management of the port through the Waterfront Design Advisory Review Committee, and establishes 3 special use districts, of which 2 are subject to the design controls. The The proposed amendments would include cleanups, including assuring the plan correctly references the waterfront plan, not the land use plan, provides administrative cleanups regarding appointments and management of the Waterfront Design Advisory Committee, and most importantly, creates a new special use district number 4, to cover port properties along the southern waterfront. Generally, we can describe that as east and south of Mission Rock. We did make one additional minor policy change. The updates remove a conditional use requirement for uses that are not screened from public view. These were found to be confusing and unnecessarily burdensome, especially to small businesses. And then finally, the zoning map amendments. So the zoning map amendments will include creating the special use district that I just described. It also includes one cleanup, Lot 31 and Assessor's Block 3941. Currently contains several private enterprises, including Kelly's Mission Rock, the Ramp Restaurant, San Francisco Boat Works, and the Nice Building. Sometime in the past, the subject lot was inadvertently zoned to M1, which allows these uses. Which would become non-conforming it was zoned from M1 to P. These uses become non-conforming. They wouldn't be permitted as new. And so we're just looking to correct that and put it back to M1 so where they can be principally permitted. And that concludes the zoning map amendments. So just in conclusion, 3 actions before you. Planning Commission has recommended approval of all of them. Again, they're the general plan amendments, the 2 area plans described along with the recreation and open space element, planning code amendments, specifically to planning code section 240, the waterfront special use district, and then the zoning map amendments, creating the special use district, and then making that one correction. And this concludes my presentation, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Snyder. Do we have any questions or concerns or comments, colleagues?
I am just looking at these amendments.
Okay, while you do that, let's go to public comment, Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Are there any members of the public who would like to speak on items 2, 3, and 4 in the chamber? Seeing none, we will move to our remote call-in line. We have 4 listeners today with 1 person in the queue. Let's take that caller, Jaime. You have 2 minutes.
So, Board of Supervisors, we need to understand, first and foremost, how this site was used by the Navy. And arbitrarily to make some statements that the land has been mitigated and abated is like hoodwinking us in broad daylight. We know there are many parts in this area that were contaminated by ammonia spills, and I'll leave it at that. So this is what the planning department does, and this is what you Board of Supervisors do. You don't have an idea, chronologically speaking, what was that area. That's where ships were built. That's where the Navy did all of their nonsense. The power plant was left with over 1 million tons of coal, which turned into coal tar. So you all have no clue about what you all are approving. And even if they build something there with the abatement and the mitigation, they have not addressed sea level rise, not only at Pier 70, but the waterfront. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your comments, and that completes the queue, Madam Chair.
Okay, with that, public comment is now closed. If there are no other comments or questions, colleagues, I will make a motion that we send items 2 to 4 out of committee with a positive recommendation.
And let me just confirm that
Yes.
the amendment is the recital relative to the EIR addendum in all 3 instruments, and that is the only change I see.
Mr. Snyder, can you confirm that, please?
Yes, I can confirm that.
Thank you.
I remember working through that addendum, so I'm all good with it.
And on the motion to amend items 2, 3, and 4 for the findings sections, Supervisor Peskin?
Aye.
Peskin, aye. Supervisor Preston? Preston, aye. Supervisor Melgar?
Aye.
Melgar, aye. You have 3 ayes. And there was a motion to recommend all 3 as amended, moved by Supervisor Melgar. On that motion, Supervisor Peskin?
Aye.
Peskin, aye. Supervisor Preston? Preston, aye. Supervisor Melgar?
Aye.
Melgar, aye. You have 3 ayes.
Thank you so much. Please call item number 5, Madam Clerk.
Item number 5 is an ordinance amending the planning code to revise the Van Ness and Market Residential Special Use District to update the option for dedication of land for development projects to fulfill their inclusionary housing obligation, to revise the zoning map to increase the maximum height for assessor's block number 0836, lot numbers 8, 9, 13 at 98 Franklin Street, and affirming appropriate findings. Members of the public who wish to provide public comment on item number 5, now is your time to press *3, and you will hear the system indicate that you have raised your hand in confirmation. Madam Chair?
Thank you so much. We do have Christy Alexander and Nick Foster from the Planning Department here, but before you make a presentation, I'm going to allow my colleague from District 5, Supervisor Dean Preston, to say a few words since this is in his district.
Thank you so much, Chair Melgar, and thank you for calendaring this item. Colleagues, before us today is legislation related to the mixed-use project at 98 Franklin Street, as well as projects at 600 McAllister Street and Parcel K in Hayes Valley. This amendment to the planning code, along with a development agreement that will be heard later this week in GAO, will help activate all of the projects that I just mentioned, 2 of which are 100% affordable for a combined total of over 600 new homes. The package is intended to unstick the development at 98 Franklin Street, a proposed residential housing project that would sit atop a new high school, which has not moved forward despite rezoning back in 2020. It would also enable a land dedication for the city to develop 100% affordable housing, and it would help jumpstart the long dormant affordable housing project at Parcel K in Hayes Valley, the current proxy site, by allocating $1 million in fees to pre-development costs for that site. So our office sees this as a rare quadruple win: a new high school, a new site in District 5 for 100% affordable housing, a renewed investment in delivering on the promises of affordable housing at Parcel K, and good jobs for San Franciscans building new housing at 98 Franklin Street. So back in 2020, the board unanimously approved a rezoning proposal that included 98 Franklin, but because of rising construction costs and pandemic-fueled supply chain issues, the development has not moved forward to break ground. My office worked with the project sponsor team to identify an alternative path here. After many months, in fact, more than a year, we landed on the package before the committee, or part of it that's before the committee today, the purpose of which is to increase the development capacity at the project site and to clarify that a land dedication can be used to satisfy the inclusionary housing requirements. I'm also excited to announce plans as part of this to acquire the fully entitled property at 600 McAllister Street. This is an update since the package was first announced at the Board of Supervisors in the fall. I think this is a very positive development for a couple of reasons. First, located at McAllister and Franklin, this affordable housing site is physically closer to the 98 Franklin site than the previously announced property at 600 Van Ness. Second, it can accommodate and has entitlements already for a higher number of units for this 100% affordable development, up to 196 units, which is higher than the Van Ness site that was the previous focus, which was approved for 168 units. So that's an additional 28 affordable homes for working San Franciscans and their families, and I'm very pleased to be moving forward in cooperation with the project sponsor and Mayor's Office of Housing and Planning around that new site. So this has really been an extensive effort. I just want to thank, before we hear from Planning, really want to thank some folks who were really instrumental in making this happen. David Nayola, Matthew Whitty, and his team at Related California for their commitment to finding a path to make this work, as well as the Planning Department, particularly Director Hillis, Christy Alexander, who I know we'll be hearing from, and Nick Foster, as well as MoCD, Director Shaw, and Lydia Ely. And I also want to thank Lee Letensky from OEWD, and Andrea Ruiz-Esquide, and Lauren Skellen, Keith Nagayama, and Charles Sullivan from the City Attorney's Office. And finally, my co-sponsors, definitely last but not least, Supervisors Dorsey, Walton, Ronan, President Peskin, and Supervisor Safai. So I understand planning staff is here to present, and again, thanks to all the folks who were instrumental in bringing this forward. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Supervisor Preston. Welcome.
Thank you, and good afternoon, Committee Chair Melgar and President Peskin, and I'd like to acknowledge Supervisor Preston as the sponsor of this legislation. I'm Christy Alexander with Planning Department staff, and just to summarize, on March 30th, 2023, the Planning Commission voted unanimously on project approvals for the proposed project located at 98 Franklin Street. The project involves the demolition of the existing surface parking lot and the construction of a new 38-story mixed-use building reaching a roof height up to 400 feet tall. The project includes a 5-story podium intended for the French American International High School, along with small-scale retail at the ground floor and 385 dwelling units situated on floors 6 through 38, with a unit mix of 275 studio or one-bedroom units, 72 two-bedroom units, and 38 three-bedroom units. The project sponsor has elected to fulfill their inclusionary housing obligation through the land dedication option, unique to projects located within the Van Ness and Market Residential Special Use District. The project sponsor will dedicate a site to the city for purposes of constructing a 100% affordable housing project containing at least 35% of the units that are being provided on the principal development project site, or 135 affordable units. Pertinent to this body is the recommendation from the Planning Commission that the Board of Supervisors approve a proposed ordinance, Board File Number 221164, that would, 1, revise the Van Ness and Market Residential Special Use District to update the option for dedication of land for development projects to fulfill their inclusionary housing obligations. 2, to revise Planning Code Section 260B10, and 3, to amend the zoning map to revise height map HT7 to change the maximum height at Assessor's Block 836, lot numbers 8, 9, and 13, from 85X and 120-365R2 to 85X and 120-400R2. In addition is the recommendation from the Planning Commission that the Board of Supervisors approve a proposed ordinance, Board File Number 221163, for a development agreement, which will be before the Government Audit and Oversight Committee this Thursday. Alongside those recommendations, the Planning Commission approved the project sponsor's request for a downtown project authorization pursuant to Planning Code Section 309 with exceptions, and adopted shadow findings pursuant to Planning Code Section 295. The Planning Department finds that the project is on balance, consistent with the downtown area plan, the Market and Octavia area plan, and the objectives and policies of the general plan, and would add a significant amount of housing and public benefits to a site that is currently undeveloped. That is all from planning, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Alexander. Do we have any other questions or comments, colleagues? Okay, well then let's go to public comment. Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Are there any members of the public who would like to speak on item number 5 on today's agenda? Seeing none, we will move to our remote call-in line. We have 5 listeners with 1 person in the queue. Let's take that caller, Jaime. They have 2 minutes.
Good afternoon. This is Jake Price with the Housing Action Coalition calling in support of this item and want to just share our thanks to Supervisor Preston and the Planning Department for working to find a solution to helping get this project unstuck. And we look forward to seeing it move forward. So thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments. We have another caller that popped up in the queue. Let's take that caller, please.
Hello, this is Shirley, the Holmes Box, a native San Franciscan, and I just want to state that I am in support of this resolution. I am in support because Related is involved, and Bill Witt is a friend. Bill Witt, who is the the CEO of Related California, is so in touch with the Western Addition community. He attended a birthday party of one of our dearest Reverend Arnold Townsend. So someone who is that connected with the community and represents Related, or is one of the CEOs of Related, of course, we stand behind any project that they put forth. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to say, and whatever Francisco da Costa says, we certainly should listen to, because he also is a pioneer of San Francisco and has been here longer than everybody on that board, probably except for Peskin, because we've known Peskin for a while as well. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you for your comments, Shirley. And that completes the queue, Madam Chair.
Thank you. With that, public comment is now closed. Supervisor Preston, would you like to make a motion?
Yes, I'd like to move the ordinance. I'm just checking if it's committee report or not.
It's not a committee report. No.
Okay, just making sure.
Just a positive recommendation.
Yes, with positive recommendation.
And on that motion, Supervisor Peskin?
Aye.
Peskin, aye. Supervisor Preston?
Aye.
Preston, aye. Supervisor Melgar?
Aye.
Melgar, aye. You have 3 ayes.
Motion passes. Thank you. Congratulations. Madam Clerk, let's go to item number 6, please.
Item number 6 is an ordinance amending the planning code to permit health services uses on the ground floor for specified areas of the Polk Street Neighborhood Commercial District, to clarify that in the Polk Street NCD and within quarter mile of its boundaries, tobacco paraphernalia establishes where any tobacco paraphernalia is sold, delivered, distributed, furnished, or marketed are not permitted, to clarify that in the Haight Street NCD, such tobacco establishments require conditional use authorization, and affirming appropriate findings. Members of the public who wish to provide public comment on item number 6 should call the number on the screen, and those already online should press *3 to join the queue. Madam Chair?
Thank you very much, Madam Clerk. President Peskin, would you like to make any remarks?
Sure, I'll make very brief remarks about a not earth-shattering piece of legislation. This was brought to us by the community that is interested in filling ground floor vacancies. This neighborhood commercial district is very close to the Sutter CPMC facility on Van Ness, and so changing the conditional use requirements for the ground floor for health services, making them a permitted use, hopefully will allow some of those vacant spaces to be occupied. In addition, the ordinance makes permanent the tobacco paraphernalia provisions that are in the Polk NCD and in the Haight NCD, which were otherwise set to expire. And I believe that is with the concurrence and support of District 5 Supervisor Preston, who is a member of this committee. It is recommended by the Planning Commission, and I think that sums it up.
Okay. Well, thank you, President Peskin. Madam Clerk, why don't we go to public comment on this item? Oh, I'm sorry, Supervisor Preston.
Thank you, Chair Melgar, and thank you, Supervisor Peskin, for your leadership on this, and also for incorporating the Haight-Ashbury into this legislation. It is strongly supported by folks in the neighborhood, and I should also note that we're working with some community members in the city attorney's office on the possibility of extending some of these controls to some other parts of our district, but I understand that would be best achieved through separate standalone legislation, so we are not seeking to do that here. But on this item that is before us, thank you, President Peskin, and please add me as a co-sponsor.
Thank you very much. Now, Madam Clerk, let's go to public comment, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Are there any members of the public who would like to speak on item number 6? Please approach the podium. Those online, now is your time to press *3 to be added to the queue.
Yes, if you guys could answer some questions. Now, this ordinance, what I was reading, says that in the Polk and Haight, there will not be people will not be able to sell tobacco products. And then I just heard that it will be an extension of another ordinance that's already in place or about to be put in place. Could somebody clarify that so I can ask my question or make my statement?
So this is not a question and answer, ma'am, but I think that the supervisors can, if they choose to, provide further comments after public comment, okay?
Okay, well then, I just want to say, well then let me make my statement.
Yes.
Okay, I thought it was, I know that Haight, I don't know whose district that is, but as far as banning the tobacco products, if it's going to be part of San Francisco, then my concern is two. One, that I know it's mainly Muslims, Arab Americans that run the tobacco stores, and to me it would be discriminating. The other thing, and it would be like Safeway and Target and all these other stores, I don't know if they sell tobacco products or not, so it would be discriminating against Middle Easterners, Americans. And the other thing is, if people rely on this one store or other stores, so there's possibility, and there's no more to it, they're not going to stop smoking. People are not going to, that's why I was asking the question. People are not going to stop smoking. How are they going to get that tobacco back through illegal, sometimes that turns into violence kind of situations?
Thank you so much. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, Chair Melgar, Honorable Supervisors, Chris Schulman, Lower Polk Community Benefit District. Thank you, Supervisor President Peskin, for introducing this ordinance. Polk Street, this was a collaborative ordinance with Polk Street. I spoke to others in other neighborhoods that are also affected by this ordinance today, but I'll speak for Polk Street. This was a collaborative ordinance with residents, property owners, businesses, and the community benefit districts that were involved. Regarding the tobacco paraphernalia, there's been prior to the initial controls over 10 years ago, there was a proliferation. In other neighborhoods, there's a proliferation just outside of our district, and this ordinance will further codify and clarify that there's a public health safety need to restrict them in this district. Regarding health services, this is a very carefully crafted ordinance that will ensure that the Polk Street and California streets remain for active uses while carefully allowing health services on the side streets, which I think is a very pragmatic approach. And I appreciate the supervisor's willingness to do this. So I urge your support and thank you for your consideration and ask that you move it as a committee report so that we can have this as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Are there any other members that would like to speak on item number 6? Seeing none, we will move to our remote call-in line. We have 0 callers in the queue, Madam Chair.
Okay, with that, public comment is now closed. President Peskin, would you like to make a motion?
I would like to, and I would like to thank Mr. Schulman and the Lower Polk Community Benefit District for their advocacy on this, and going all the way back to 2009 when they had my predecessor, David Chu, pass the tobacco paraphernalia provisions. And with that, I would like to make a motion to send the item to the full board with a positive recommendation as a committee report for hearing tomorrow, July 11th.
And on that motion, Supervisor Peskin?
Aye.
Peskin, aye. July 11th?
Tomorrow?
Okay. Supervisor Preston? Preston, aye. Supervisor Melgar?
Aye.
Melgar, you have 3 ayes.
Thank you. Now, let's call item number 7, please.
Item number 7 is an ordinance amending the building code to outline the site permit application process, define and limit the scope of building official review of site permits, and require simultaneous interdepartmental review of site permits and affirming appropriate findings. Those joining us online, now is your time to press *3 to be added to the queue. You will hear the system indicate that you have raised your hand in confirmation. Madam Chair?
So I understood that Supervisor Safai was going to be here to present on this
Said he was. I saw him at the
item.
Chinese chamber.
So,
I can hear him in the ante room.
oh, there he is.
Hey, Supervisor.
Welcome, Supervisor Safai, to the Land Use Committee. If you are ready to present on this item, this floor is yours.
Thank you. So I'm not going to spend too much time speaking about this because I know that there's a request for a continuance. The chair let me know about that. But I will just say this is something that we've been talking about and working on for over 2 years. We've spent a considerable amount of time with the Building Inspection Commission, the Building Department, working with stakeholders in the community. And in our mind, this is a very straightforward piece of legislation. It's about doing something in San Francisco that should have been done a long time ago, and it's about simplifying and streamlining the site permit process. And so, in our opinion, we are one of the only, I think we're the only jurisdiction that actually has the site permit process. And what has happened over the years is that rather than waiting for the addendum and the construction documents and all the process where the building permits are actually supposed to have significant levels of detail, the building department over the years has added on layers and layers and layers of requirement to the site permit. And so our intent is to say, in very simple terms, let's look at what's in the code. Let's say that is it all that should be required for the site permit to streamline that process. And then if there's additional concerns, they can be addressed during the building construction documents. We're also asking for simultaneous review so that one department and other departments are not waiting, but that the review is happening concurrently and it's happening at the same time to speed the process up. We did spend time with the Code Advisory Committee and the Building Inspection Commission and Department. They came back with a certain number of recommendations. We agreed to the Slope Protection Act amendment. We think that that was an important amendment. But the other amendments, quite frankly, and just to say on the record, would essentially undermine the entire piece of legislation. If it is such, and I said this at the commission, if the department believed that they could do this through memorandum, an executive memorandum from the director, it could have been done years ago. But what I do know is from talking and working with people in the industry, whether they're builders, architects, engineers, or others, what they often hear, and I know this from practice, if it's not in the code, then it leaves a lot of room for interpretation. So that's what our intent is with this legislation. Appreciate Chair Melgar's support. I know that she also had an amendment that had to do with having simultaneous review for those projects that are required for electronic documentation. We support that as well. We appreciate that amendment. So I'll just end my remarks there. Not exactly sure why Building Department had not spent the time briefing other committee members since we've been working on this for months. But out of courtesy and respect, I will support the chair's request and the department's request for a 1-week continuance. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Supervisor Safai, and thank you for your leadership on this issue. As you noted, I do have a friendly amendment to this legislation that was previously considered by the Building Inspection Commission, and that is to apply the simultaneous review only to electronically submitted applications for permits. And it is my understanding from the department that right now 70% of the site permits are already submitted online, in that they are trying to move towards the goal of 100%. So as this, as they figure out their processes and they move up towards the 100%, this legislation will grow with it to include everything that's submitted electronically. So I think that's just good policy. But I do want to ask Christine Gasparak or Carl Nisita, who are here representing the department, to come up and talk about their request to continue this for a week.
Thank you, Chair Melgar, Supervisors. Good afternoon. Carl Nisita, Legislative Affairs Manager for the Department of Building Inspection. So as Supervisor Safai mentioned, the Building Inspection Commission did consider this ordinance, and they unanimously recommended approval of the ordinance if modified. I can run through those amendments quickly. The request for the continuance was for two reasons. First, I think there was some confusion about the amendment regarding simultaneous review of online or of digital applications. So that's one reason. And the other reason is to spend time with the supervisors to address the reason why the Building Inspection Commission recommended approval if modified. And so their recommendations were as follows: to require concurrent review of the site permit application while the planning department completes its entitlement review, and then concurrent issuance when the planning department issues any required authorizations under the planning code. Supervisor Safai's ordinance does include simultaneous review in a later section in the ordinance. By including it in section 106A.3.4.2, we think it's a little more clear to explicitly require concurrent review and then concurrent issuance with the planning department's required authorizations. The second amendment would be to remove the contents of the site permit application and scope of site permit review. As Supervisor Safai said, this would codify the requirements of a site permit application in the code. Right now, though, the requirements that would be included in the ordinance and therefore in the building code are what the department already uses in site permit review. There was a memo that Supervisor Safai mentioned that was issued by the director that its intent was to solve the problem that Supervisor Safai mentioned, that as the years went on, more requirements were added on. We have had very positive feedback from our customers that the memo has had its intended effect, so we're glad with that. The third amendment that the BIC recommended was to provide fire department access to the site in the site permit application. A technical amendment on page 3, line 22, to add as outlined in AB 32. And then the fifth amendment is the amendment that Supervisor Safai has accepted, and that's to provide the Slope Protection Act checklist when required by site location.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Nisita. So I will make a motion that we continue this for 1 week. I just want to make it clear to the department that I am not making a motion on these amendments that you have requested. It is just your time to speak to my colleagues about what you see, and then we are going to agendize it for next week as a committee report.
Very much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you. Supervisor Safai, did you have anything else to add?
I just wanted to thank some of the people that worked on this since they've come out here today and are calling in, not knowing that we were going to continue this until the last minute. So I'd like to thank the Hotel Council, the Bay Area Council, the Chinese Chamber of Commerce, residential builders, San Francisco Building and Construction Trade, all for their support on this legislation, and thank the staff at DBI and the Permit Center and other areas and Public Works for answering our questions and working with us, as well as the chair and her staff. Thank you.
Okay.
And the City Attorney's Office.
Thank you so much. Madam Clerk, let's go to public comment on this item, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Are there any members of the public who would like to speak on item number 7 on today's agenda? Seeing none, we will move. Yep, we have folks.
Yes, we have folks here.
You have 2 minutes. Those joining us online, now's your time to press *3.
Good afternoon, Chair Melgar, President Peskin, Supervisor Preston, and Supervisor Safai. I just thought of one comment after hearing the gentleman talking about the streamlining. I remember that in the past couple of years when we brought up the issue of demolitions that ended up, that were submitted as alteration, and then in the process of construction, the developers used the excuse that they found dry rot, or they found out that they needed to actually move more material than they planned for. The building inspection department actually said that there was no way at the time of the submission of the plans for them to tell whether or not certain parts of the building have to be removed. But they actually needed the engineering drawings to figure out the extent of the material removal. So I think this is a good opportunity, if you want to do the streamlining, to actually get the Department of Building Inspection involved early on so that they could actually come up and say, oh, well, wait a minute, this is the alterations that they submitted actually requires more removal of the material, so it might actually be tantamount to demolition. So I think this is a good opportunity to look at that, and if there's any way that we could figure out the actual extent of an alteration in advance so we could declare it, what it is it alteration or is it going to be really tantamount to demolition? I think it would be a great opportunity to visit it at this time. Thanks a lot.
Thank you for your comments. Next speaker.
Good evening, supervisors. Thank you for taking this item. Unfortunately, it got continued. I'm here today to express my support for the legislation. I have experienced challenges in delays in the submittal process and the business environment in San Francisco, particularly within the planning department, building departments, while we're working on projects at a project at 350 San Jose Avenue. The lengthy timeline, efficiency, and the lack of coordination among the departments have been concerning. For example, it took 3 years from planning, 21 months for a site permit, 14 months for an addendum approval, and still today, I do not have my full permit, and we're heading now into our 6th year. I have received numerous comments from various departments ranging from valid concerns, but mostly petty, which have experienced. We have experienced architects and engineers, so there's no excuses. With over 30 years of experience, that is. These comments, which have contributed to extensive delays and a lack of transparency and accountability of the department heads, is disheartening and is the absence of effectiveness of the community of collaboration of the departments. I believe that implementing a third-party review system similar to the parties throughout the city of California would alleviate the challenges, introduce competent individuals, and adopting a checklist based on the submittal process would improve the efficiency of the project evaluations. The current situation is a contributory and had led to the exodus of builders and investors.
Thank you so much. Your time has elapsed. Next speaker.
Supervisors, Gary G. Architects. We've been in business in San Francisco for 40 years. We want to show support for the legislation, number one. Number two, other jurisdictions have similar type of review process like Burlingame and Hayward that we've experienced. We are happy to see San Francisco to go to this process. Conceptually, I think we need to really look at the definition of what is a site permit review. Historically, we've experienced with different plan checkers, they start to get into the addendum review. We want to prevent that from happening. We also experience incredible backlogs with each individual division that DBI goes through, whether it's mechanical, plan check, fire. There's always been anywhere from 4 to 6 weeks delay before it gets assigned. We need to address those. Also, planning, who historically always waits, we want to also encourage that the historic, environmental, and design review occurs simultaneously too. We encourage that there's some timeline or milestones being incorporated to the site permit review. And just as an example for horror stories, we filed a permit in 2015. Later, we had to revise it. It took us 7 years to get a permit for a to convert a church into 4 units and 3 ADUs. And unfortunately, it was in one department almost 6 years. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next speaker.
Chairman Melgar, Supervisors Peskin, Supervisors Preston, thank you for taking time today to discuss this issue. I support this legislation. It's an excellent first step in moving forward. I think we are aware of a lot of the time it takes to get a permit in this town is longer than anywhere else. And this streamlining process of getting our site permits issued more efficiently is a good first start. But there's a lot more work that needs to get done throughout the departments. Someone mentioned a backlog. A lot of the departments are backlogged. You get out and then you're into street permit, and oh, you're number 70 in the list, but we can't even tell you when we're going to process it because priority projects may come in between there. So I applaud the transparency, doing it simultaneously, getting the site permit out, but we really need to look at, are we using everything efficiently? Some of the folks mentioned third-party reviewers. I think that's an excellent idea. It can really act to, when we do have backups in some of these departments, if you get a third-party reviewer, you can also see the timing. Is this getting done more efficiently over here or over here? Is it thorough? Is it complete? So I really just want to leave and say that this is a much-needed first step. We are in a housing crisis, and it's good that we are stepping forward to address that and really make things happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments. Next speaker.
Hi, my name is Phelim O'Reilly. Good afternoon, supervisors. I fully support this legislation. I'd wish it would be going a little bit further. Site permits should be only deal with planning, fenestration, life safety, and egress. That should be it, period. I understand that slope protection was brought into it, and I understand that point. I'm just going to bring you away from San Francisco briefly. I worked in London recently, where I worked in London Borough of Kensington and Chelsea, and also Hammersmith and Fulham, where there are beautiful 6- and 7-story, 4- to 6-story buildings, grade 1 and grade 2 listed buildings that we worked on. The planning application there, we call it plan permission, we were able to get most things achieved in 8 weeks. After the 8 weeks, the project would be deemed approved. If a project had to go through environmental, it would take 14 weeks. When the planning permission goes in, simultaneously it goes out to the public, because most projects, they're designed correctly. They're 90% of them, what I see, and even the ones that I've done, are within the planning code. So we really need urgent timelines mandated here. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your comments. Next speaker.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. Morris Casey, local builder, residential builder member. I'd like to thank all of the supervisors who are supporting and being proactive and making changes. It definitely needs to be done. I've had a site permit in waiting for 6 months now that's been sitting since approved by planning, and we still can't submit our building application, our building engineering. So this is definitely something everybody wants to see, housing being built, but this is something that needs to be corrected, and we're all looking for the one thing here, to build housing, and time is of the essence. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you so much. Next speaker.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. Sean Kigren, RBA. The purpose of a site permit is primary to allow the appeal process to play out, to minimize the financial impact of hiring the entire design team and having the work being subjected to future changes that can come at future appeal hearings. It allows a project sponsor to obtain a level of certainty that there won't be any more changes to her project prior to work commencing for each of the design professionals. The system has proven very successful in the past, and I can remember site permits taking just 2 months post-planning approval. The fact that this post-planning approval now takes up to and over a year speaks to the severity of the problem. This problem is not restricted to one department. Instead, the system relies upon several departments to review. It's further complicated because the site permit process is so important to the planning department, but for all the other departments, it should just be a courtesy review. That's the problem. Remember, a site permit doesn't allow us to drive a single nail. Why are these plan checkers allowed multiple rounds of plan checking for a site permit? Why isn't there a policy that requires the plan checkers to get more training if they don't complete their site permits review in an hour? Or if they require multiple rounds of plan checking, more than 2 to 3 times in a month? Let's get them some help. We need to do something. I support the legislation. It's a good first step. But I'm concerned it doesn't go far enough. And should we be discussing better ways to allow for more transparency so we can all see which plan checkers are producing code-conforming projects in 1 round and versus 5 rounds? Should we be considering outsourcing as to third parties? We need to do something.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Next speaker.
Yeah, I hear all this talk about, developing, planning, scrutinizing, reviewing. And when I went to the Planning Commission the other day, I now mention this when the next item comes up. Who are you building for? Who are you building for? I mean, you're building for people that make a lot of money. You're trying to get rid of the poor here, the workers, the ones that take care of your kids, the ones that are the retail clerks, the ones that work in the hospitals, in the clinics, in the community clinics. When are you going to start building housing? There's enough housing, and there's 40,000 empty affordable housing places. Why not? I don't know if they belong to landlords or real estate. Buy them, provide them for the people here. The homeless, they're never going to have the money to be able to live in a house or an apartment or a unit. When are you going to address them? Their needs. And some of them, they don't even want housing. You know why? Because they don't know if they're going to wake up the next day, or they don't know how they're going to wake up.
Thank you so much. Are there any other members of the public that would like to speak on this item, number 7 of the agenda? Seeing none, we will move to our remote call-in line. We have 14 listeners today with 2 in the queue. Let's take the first caller, Jaime. You have 2 minutes.
Hi, my name is Rudy Gonzalez. I'm the Secretary-Treasurer of the San Francisco Building and Construction Trades Council. We represent over 27 local unions here in the city and the greater region, many of which are out of work right now, including apprentices. It's our job to try to analyze a lot of these policies and figure out which ones are going to be pro-job, but good job. And I think that this is a very surgical and important step. It is not a silver bullet. I can't find one. Anyway, but I think that this is an important step. Appreciate Supervisor Melgar and Safai's leadership on it. I want to associate myself with the written comments in the packet from the Building Inspection Commission, including the staff, and also tie this into a need to staff smartly. I think one of the speakers was talking about outsourcing. I do think that there are likely efficiencies to be gained within the public sector before we throw the baby out with the bathwater, so I would encourage the supervisors to work closely with the departments. I think an integrated and holistic way to look at permits is that we need to have these departments kind of orchestrated. We need a maestro to really push these things into place. And I think a lot of that falls under the city administrator and the mayor's purview, but this body can put in boundaries and guardrails, so to speak. And like this one, I think they will support a more efficient and streamlined approach. I also want to note that I think this reconciles well with the Residential Wage Theft Prevention Act of 2022. And so for those reasons, we offer our full-throated support for the legislation, and I appreciate, even if I'm modest, an important step in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let's take the next caller, please.
Good afternoon. Cyrus Sanadaji here with Presidio Bay. Thank you again for allowing me the opportunity to share a couple of thoughts. Echoing some of Rudy's points, the legislation is a great first step here. This has the overall entitlement and specifically site permit process has been a major issue in San Francisco for every product type, really for over a decade at this point. And despite numerous efforts by the department and others to self-regulate and try to improve the process, it has just become a massive burden and is overwhelming given how many different agencies really do impact the overall site permit review and approval process beyond the discretionary review at a planning commission as an example. And so this piece of legislation is hugely critical in order to start to address some of the inherent scope creep that's come about in the years in the last decade or so that has clearly resulted in the approval process dragging out to a completely unacceptable duration that's had a direct impact on our housing production levels in the city at a time that housing production is needed more than ever. So at a base minimum, just thank you again to Supervisors Melgar and Safai for taking the lead on this issue. And though relatively or seemingly small, the impacts of this legislation will be pretty significant. And we're optimistic that in conjunction with a number of other initiatives that are currently being worked on, we'll actually start to see some tangible progress as it relates to overall review and approval periods that will hopefully allow us to start reducing some of these barriers to construction and development.
Thank you so much.
Thank you again.
Let's take the next caller. We have 15 listening with 3 in the queue.
Hi, my name is Frank Noto. Can you hear me?
Yes, please proceed.
I live in the inner Sunset. I have one daughter and her family who are forced out of the city. Another lives with her two daughters, and she's an administrator for the San Francisco School District. 2 daughters who live in a one-bedroom apartment. I want to thank Supervisor Melgar and Engardio for leading on this effort.
I'm going to pause your time.
This is really essential.
Jaime, let's pause this caller.
Yes.
Actually, you're calling about item number 8 right now. We are on item number 7. That is the ordinance amending the building code to outline site permit application processes. So you can redirect your comments, or you can press *3 to take yourself out of the queue. All right, so let's take the next caller. Again, folks, we're on item number 7. This is the ordinance on the building code to outline the site permit application process for building official review. And the next item will be item number 8, the family housing item. So let's take the next caller.
Good afternoon, members of the board. My name is Reza Krishnavisan, SIA Consulting. I have been in design and construction and consulting in this great city of ours for the last 30 years. Everybody has chimed in of how to fix the problem. And what I can tell you, representing my clients, is that I can assure you that there's still a lot of people that would be willing to invest in this great city and not go elsewhere. But unfortunately, the issue is that, or one of the issues is this site permit process, which the developers, for them to get a loan, they need to get a site permit, they need some sort of an approval, and the project just gets stuck for months and months. and the plans get reviewed at a construction document phase, which requires a lot of different consultants to come in where developers don't have the budget for it. So it needs to somehow, this site permit process needs to speed up so the owners, the property owners can get to their money, get to their loans, so that they can hire these consultants to work on these plans. And slowing this down, I got to tell you, I got clients now going all the way to Truckee and South Lake Tahoe to do construction, and they don't want to do that. They would love to stay in the city, but this deprives work from many different trades, from architects and engineers and my team to construction crew, painters, plumbers, and people who are from paycheck to paycheck, and they can't.
Thank you so much. Your time has lapsed.
They're running out.
If we can take the next caller, please.
Good afternoon, supervisors. This is Jake Price on behalf of the Housing Action Coalition. We are very appreciative of Supervisors Melgar and Safai's efforts to improve the site permit review process, which we all know is very broken as is. We want to see the most effective policy to get permits done more efficiently, regardless of any politics that may be at play, and we are really encouraged by what we've seen both in this proposal as well as others, and we look forward to seeing successful improvements throughout the permitting process, whether or not they're currently in this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your comments, and that completes the queue.
Okay, thank you. With that, public comment is now closed. Supervisor Safai.
Thank you. I just want to thank all the commenters that came out and for their insight. I absolutely agree. I mean, one of the intents of this legislation was to infuse certainty, and that was the original intent of site permit, was to create certainty for those that are building. The average wait time for typical applicant to get a building permit, full building permit, is almost 2 years today, and then for a single-family home, it's over 2 years. And that is not acceptable when we have the housing crisis that we have. With this legislation, we predict that potentially it could cut the wait time down anywhere between 6 to 18 months off the waiting time. And so although it's a small step, I would say it's a kind of a medium step, not a small step. I think it's a medium step and has the ability to have some significant impact, and will continue the conversation to streamline the process. So thank you, Chair. I know we're continuing this item for 1 week, but I think we're in good shape. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I just want to say, Supervisor Safai, thank you so much for your dogged persistence with this item and for all of your work, and particularly your staff, Jeff Buckley, for all the work that he put into it. So I would like to make a motion that we amend the legislation with what I have circulated, which limits the simultaneous review to electronically submitted projects. Thank you very much for your help, Deputy City Attorney Pearson, on the language. And then to continue it for 1 week until next week, when we will agendize it as a committee report.
And to clarify,
I'm sorry, did you have something else to say, Supervisor? Yes.
I just had one question. I just wanted to make sure that the slope protection amendment was already, yes, it's already there.
Yes, it is.
On page 4. Okay, thank you.
And on the motion,
I'm sorry, President Peskin.
I think that amendment also has to be made. Am I correct, Deputy City Attorney? Or did that get included in what is before us?
Deputy City Attorney Ann Pearson, I think that both amendments are included in the written amendments that were circulated to you. Supervisor Melgar just described part of them.
Right.
The other part is what Supervisor Safai has described, and I think you're moving the whole thing.
We need to act on both of them.
Okay, do you want me to make the motion? I will make the motion that we include both amendments, the slope protection amendment as well.
and on the motion to include Supervisor Melgar and Supervisor Safai's amendments on the slope and electronically submitted Application, Supervisor Peskin.
Aye.
Peskin, aye. Supervisor Preston.
Aye.
Preston, aye. Supervisor Melgar.
Aye.
Melgar, aye. You have 3 ayes.
Okay, that was also to continue it to next week, right?
And on
Yes,
the motion to continue as amended to next week, Supervisor Peskin. Peskin, aye.
Aye.
Supervisor Preston. Preston, aye. Supervisor Melgar.
Aye.
Melgar, aye. You have 3 ayes.
Thank you. Thank you, Supervisor Safai. All right. Okay, let's go on to our last item, item number 8. And I'd like to welcome Supervisor Engardio from District 4 to the Land Use Committee as well.
Item number 8 is an ordinance amending the planning code to create the Family Housing Opportunities Special Use District. The planning code to authorize up to 4 units on individual lots, up to 12 units on merged lots in RH1 districts, and group housings in RH1 districts for eligible projects in the special use district. To also amend the planning code to exempt eligible projects in the special use district from certain height, open space, and dwelling unit exposure and rear yard setback requirements, conditional use authorizations, and neighborhood notification requirements. Also amending the subdivision code to authorize eligible projects in the special use district to qualify for condominium conversion or condominium map. That includes existing dwelling units and affirming appropriate findings. Members of the public who are joining us remotely, now is your time to press *3 to be added to the queue. You'll hear the system indicate you have raised your hand in confirmation. Please wait until we get to public comment, and you will hear the system indicate that you have been unmuted to begin your comments. Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Madam Clerk, and thank you, colleagues, for hearing this item. I just want to, again, explain a little bit of where this legislation came from, and to thank Supervisor Engardio for his co-sponsorship and work on this legislation, as well as all of you and your staffs, because it is technically difficult and complicated piece of legislation. I would also like to thank Julia Gualco-Nelson and Deputy City Attorney Ann Pearson for all of their help, technical assistance, and advice, as well as many of the community members that we have worked with, particularly the Westside Tenants Association, the Anti-Displacement Coalition, and the folks at the West of Twin Peaks Central Council. So I want to just back up a little bit and tell you that my impetus for working on this legislation was to address impediments, but also to address the specific needs of West Side residents and the generational changes that are happening on our side of town, along with the commitments that we have made in the housing element. I see a lot of my neighbors in single-family homes on the west side being stuck with just the physical envelopes of the houses that they purchased 20, 30, 40 years ago that are decaying. They need, energy-efficient windows. They often contain lead, asbestos, need improvements, have wiring that does not support modern appliances. They have oftentimes an oil tank out in the front. They need a lot of work. And they're also, the recipients of the privilege of having a low tax basis because of Proposition 13, and the curse of not having a lot of housing stock in the West Side where they can downsize if they choose to. If they want to stay in the communities that they know and love, close to their friends, close to their faith communities, because all that we have is the particular housing stock which was created in a large part because of redlining policies that our country supported during the 1950s. Which led to, lots of neighborhoods being zoned as single-family homes without a lot of the transportation amenities that folks on the east side of town have. In going about this, I talked to a lot of folks on the west side, and I will let Supervisor Engardio chime in a little bit about the situation in District 4. But there has been a generational change on the west side. We do have now a lot of Asian homeowners who, have told me that they want to live with the in-laws, close by. Second, third generation, that they want to live either in the same envelope or close by. We are also seeing the need to upgrade a lot of these structures because of all of the things that I just listed and the expense of that going up every year. We have right now not just a housing shortage, but a labor shortage and supply chain issues with construction materials. So costs are steep. And many times if somebody needs to move out and go into an assisted living situation or being taken care of by someone, they really have very few choices if they want to upgrade their home, to put disability upgrades because it's expensive. And really the only way to do it is to, sell your home, make it into a McMansion so that you can recoup the cost. And that is a bummer because a lot of our neighborhoods' character as middle-class neighborhoods is changing. So my goal with this legislation started with the Domicity White Paper, which architect Eugene Liu put out, that spelled out a model for a single-family home being turned into, 3 flats, 4 flats, something a little denser, while still being like an infill that fit into the neighborhood character, the residential character of these neighborhoods. And because, it's hard to put the architectural design issues into planning code, we went about making sure that we allowed it for folks and made it easier, made it more streamlined if folks chose to go this way. I have tried, since I introduced this months and months ago, to work with a lot of folks who thought, yeah, this is a good idea, Mirna, but, what about tenants? What about a lot of other issues that come up when you're trying to do change along these lines? And so I have worked with lots of folks, and I do have amendments here today, and I know President Peskin has amendments as well. I do intend to continue this for until next week to make sure that everybody has a chance to read this amendment and give us feedback. But I will read them into the record now and then turn it over to President Peskin to read his. But so mine on page 5 and also refer to on page 12, line 14, amend the density exceptions for single lot and lot merger projects to also allow up to 1 unit per 1,000 square feet of lot area, whichever is greater. Number 2, add dwelling unit mix to the lot merger density exceptions, pages 8 and 9. For 2 lot merger projects, there would be a minimum of 2 2-bedroom units and at least 1 3-bedroom unit. For 3 lot merger projects, there would be a minimum of 3 2-bedroom units or at least 2 units with 3 bedrooms. This will ensure a mix of family-sized units, 2 and 3 bedrooms, and address the needs of family housing as was suggested by the Planning Commission in a unanimous vote. Number 3, on pages 10 through 12, include tenant displacement by including a 5-year look back of certain restrictions. Thank you, Supervisor Preston, for that idea. The purpose of this section on page 10, line 10, which also refers to section 66300 of the California Government Code, also known as SB 330. It's because 330 has an expiration date, and we want to make sure that those protections stay here in San Francisco beyond that expiration date if it fails to be continued at the state level. Then on page 11 and 12, those tenant displacement protections are spelled out, which will read, none of this will be allowed if the project is proposing 3 or more units, and any of these apply in the last 5 years. Will be deed restricted as low-income household, subject to rent control, rented by a low or very low-income household, occupied by a tenant at the time of application, or where no fault eviction or buyout occurred in the last 5 years. And then a 2-unit building with no tenants in the last 5 years would still have to go through the conditional use process, which was something that Supervisor Peskin suggested, so thank you. That is referenced on page 15, line 16, and it clarifies that if the project would demolish 2 rent-controlled units, including any unauthorized dwelling units, then you have to go through the conditional use process. So that decision would remain as it is today with the Planning Commission. Then I have some clerical amendments which are not substantive, but on page 4, changes the date of the HCD opportunity map from 2021 to 2021 from 2020, which is the basis of the well-resourced neighborhood map. Revises the group housing unit to state group housing bedroom, page 5 and throughout. Clarifies that projects cannot propose a combination of dwelling units and group housing. Clarify that the unauthorized dwelling units do not count for the purposes of calculating existing dwelling units on the property at the time of application. And also clarify that existing dwelling units qualify for the 2-bedroom and or 3-bedroom requirement. So I'm going to also propose that we duplicate the file because some of the amendments that I'm going to read, and also Supervisor Engardio wants to read, do need to be re-referred to the Planning Commission for their input. So after we duplicate the file and Supervisor Engardio makes the amendments to that file, I also have one clarification for amendment, which is about the rear yard unit and their code compliance with adding decks and stairs, because I want those units to be habitable in the same way as all the other units. And so I do want to address some of the issues that folks have brought up in opposition to this before I let President Peskin speak and Ms. Flores. I want to point out that this program cannot be, first of all, this is geared towards single-family, owner-occupied folks. That's who I want to make sure has choices in this new housing landscape. I am also aware that there's legislation introduced by our mayor that streamlines this, and I hope that there's no confusion between that legislation and our legislation because they are very different. This program cannot be used where there has been a no-fault eviction or buyout in the last 5 years. If the building has 2 units, it must go through the conditional use application as they always have. It is the case now, so there's no change to that. This program only applies to RH zone lots in well-resourced neighborhoods. This is to ensure that small homes with illegal units are not at risk of gentrification in neighborhoods where gentrification is an issue. For example, in the Outer Mission, there are many illegal in-laws, and those are not subject to this legislation. An owner using this program must have owned their home for at least a year. After adding units, those units will be deed restricted and rent controlled. This is a critical component because our rent control housing stock is frozen right now in time. In 1979, this could turn a single family home which is currently not rent controlled, into multiple units, which now would be rent control if they are. If you bought affordable house, if you brought up affordable housing production, this is I think what would satisfy it. I do prefer rent control over BMR, first of all, because it's feasible economically to do it, which BMRs would not be. But there's no government agency right now that would help a single-family homeowner, an owner-occupied building, to manage those units, to rent them up, to make sure that they are compliant. But we do produce affordable housing with this legislation because of the merger of adjacent lots. So when they go above the 10-unit threshold, BMRs would be created in compliance with our Section 317. So I want to address a condo conversion unit issue because today's condo conversion moratorium applies to buildings of 3 units or more, which are not included in this legislation at all. 2-unit buildings are already able to be converted into condos. And that was created, to protect the rental stock. So today, you could build new condos in an empty lot, and you don't have to worry about the moratorium or the lottery. So since we're talking about single-family homes, possibly going to 3 or 4 units, I don't believe that the condo moratorium is relevant, but it does open an option to existing homeowners in case they want to subdivide their property and pass on those units to their heirs if they want to. And if they don't want to, if they instead want to rent them as rent control units to support their limited income as they get older, they can. So that is the extent of my comments. Thank you so much for listening, and I will pass it on to President Peskin.
Thank you, Chair Melgar. First, just a little bit of high-level observation. I think it was exactly 20 years ago that I proposed a accessory dwelling unit citywide piece of legislation, which interestingly enough was thwarted by the Board of Supervisors, not on progressive moderate lines, but on east-west supervisorial district lines where progressive, quote-unquote, west side supervisors join moderate, quote-unquote, west side supervisors to come up with a magic number of 6, and that legislation never came to fruition until, well, more than a decade later, wherein I concur with your comments that the city and its residents and its their elected officials have evolved, and now accessory dwelling units, every member of the Board of Supervisors falls all over themselves to make them more ubiquitous and easier to build, and I note are subject to rent control under Costa-Hawkins agreement. So I appreciate the policy notion that this board continues to adopt case by case, which is that where the city confers more density or exceptions to the code, that it in turn is able to realize rent-controlled units. And with those handful of exceptions under Costa-Hawkins by contract, we ain't making it anymore, right? Everything that we have as of June of 1979 is all we're going to foreseeably have, with a few exceptions under the Palmer decision, obviously. So I appreciate the amendments that are looking towards not diminishing our rent-controlled housing stock, and I think that is an important refining of the legislation. I also have been saying for a long, long time that I believe in, I think we should all believe in, density equity. I happen to have the honor of representing the geographically smallest of the 11 supervisorial districts, but it has the same number of human beings as the other 10 in a much smaller landmass. In communities that range from Chinatown to Russian Hill and North Beach, and the apartment district of the Upper Tenderloin, Lower Nob Hill, and I always say when the YIMBYs are banging their hands on the table about, we didn't approve 10 units that shade a park or whatever, yeah, if the rest of San Francisco looked like the northeast corner of San Francisco, we would have hundreds of thousands of more units. So I also appreciate the thrust of the most recently adopted housing element that says go west, where some houses don't touch, and RH1 or less RH2 with 1 unit on them are more commonplace. So I wanted to kind of start with that high-level perspective. I have, before I was in office, this is the 1990s, been stalwart about doing anything and everything in our power to prevent evictions, to prevent displacement, and have done everything I can to, within the boundaries of the law and adjudication of our laws, to stop the scourge of the Ellis Act in San Francisco. And by the way, have been very supported in that by successive boards of supervisors. I mean, I don't think that there's a policy dispute around that. So anything and everything that we can do around legislation like this that encourages more density, that is predicated in a city where we are built out on some amount of demolition, that human beings are not displaced and thrown to the winds. I just this weekend encountered a person whose mother I knew, who raised her kid in North Beach, who is, I mean, I know this guy. I've known him for 30 years. He is now homeless on the streets of North Beach. He's not leaving his neighborhood, and he, you know, all of these things are complicated, but that's what we have to make sure, that any piece of legislation that we adopt has the best, highest levels of security for our extant residents who want to stay and age in place. And, you know, I look at the community that I live in, and I still have artists and poets and freaks, and it's because of the good grace of rent control. And so that's just paramount to me. And and eviction protection and rent control goes hand in hand, particularly because we ain't got no vacancy control. So, and we can't have vacancy control under the laws of the state of California that interfere with all of the good things that we would otherwise do or attempt to do in San Francisco. So I wanted to just kind of lay those things out as threshold policies that we don't disagree with, or I don't think we disagree with. And I also appreciate the policy sentiment around high resource areas. And I think that that is a noble concept as well. I also note, and I've said this before, and you know, when you look at the map, the well-resourced neighborhood map, it is the highest and high resources are indeed where the housing element urges us to go on the west side of San Francisco. So, I mean, the fact that this is a piece of legislation that emanates from the District 7 supervisor and is co-sponsored by the District 4 supervisor is meaningful. I also, and I don't claim to be expert about every block in the city and county of San Francisco or that which is encompassed by this map, but I do note that there is, in the instance of the northeast corner of the city, and I've said this to you kind of at a high level, not over this particular piece of legislation, a little bit of a schism between the reality on the ground and what is set forth in the findings, and particularly is finding H that says, since 2005, just 10% of all new housing in San Francisco and 10% of new affordable housing in San Francisco has been built in high and highest resource neighborhoods, though these areas cover nearly 52% of the residential land in the city. I take that recital as fact. In these high resource neighborhoods, 65% of the land is limited to 1 or 2 units. That may be true, but in the research that I have done, it is not true in the high resource area that goes into the very dense extant neighborhoods that are in the northeast corner that are in District 3, where just looking at the Sanborn maps, virtually every single lot is actually denser than the RH3 zoning. And I appreciate the fact that the amendments, as I've quickly scanned them, I need to spend more time with them, would, in essence, primarily apply only to instances where there is a single unit dwelling on an RH3, in this case, lot. But it definitely, I mean, if you look at these blocks, and these are kind of all of them it is not 65% of the land in these areas limited to 1 and 2. It is not even the converse. It's not even 1/3. It's more like maybe 5%. I mean, there are just virtually no single-family units there. And so I get concerned, not about maybe I'm making up a number, 5 or 10 particular single-family homes that are in RH3, but I get concerned even with the amendments that it opens the door to people going down conditional use where we actually have the level of density that we are trying to achieve. So I just wanted to state that for the record and kind of put that in the parking lot for a little bit. The northeast corner of the city is also the oldest and presumably that's why it's the densest part of the city and has the city's preponderance of, albeit tiny, historic districts. And to that end, I just wanted to suggest language that has been approved as to form that I have conveyed during the course of this meeting, because it was only approved as to form to you, Madam Chair and Supervisor Preston, that at sub 7 makes a few changes to not proposing the demolitions of buildings that are located in Article 10 historic districts, which is a slight change from the way you drafted it, as well as to sub D and sub E to add individually and or as contributor to a historic district in California Register or National Register districts. I wanted to add those as well. I look forward to reading closely the amendments that you have made that I've been trying to page through during this, but I also had one particular piece of language that stood out to me that I may not be what it intended, and I may be misreading it. This is on page 15 of the version that you have most recently circulated, subsection F, review and approvals, which says, notwithstanding any other provisions of this code, and irrespective of whether a project is utilizing a density exception pursuant to subsection D1 of this section 294.94, for any project that meets the eligibility criteria in subsection C of this section, the following shall apply. And so what, and maybe Deputy City Attorney Pearson, you can help me with this. What I think, the way I read that is it doesn't matter whether you are actually utilizing this section to increase density. It says, notwithstanding any other provision of this code and irrespective of whether a project is utilizing a density exception pursuant to this. So in other words, by virtue of the fact that you exist in this area, you don't have to comply with 311. You don't have to get a conditional use for other things. I don't think that's what we intend. I think, well, I don't know what Supervisor Melgar and Supervisor Engardio intend, but I think that this would, the way this ought to work is only if you are actually getting the density. So the words irrespective of whether a project is utilizing seems to turn this on its head.
Thank you.
Deputy City Attorney Ann Pearson, I understand the intent of the legislation, and we'll certainly talk with the drafting attorney to understand why it's been formulated this way. And if it doesn't capture the intent, we can revise it by next week.
Thank you, Madam City Attorney, because my intent was to only allow this if there was density being added. That
Understood.
was the whole point. Thank you.
Yeah, so I look forward to taking this up next week. And again, I'm putting a placeholder around the communities that are dense and do work and may well be high resource. I also have to say, and I don't know if Supervisor Melgar and I are allowed to go take a tour together in the intervening week, given that it's before this committee, but, and I see the city attorney saying no, but I will say that if you go to those blocks, while they may, relative to some state averaging, be high resourced, you will see what I saw, because I went and actually took a personal slow tour of those blocks, that they house, property by property, vary from extremely low income, predominantly monolingual Cantonese speakers to tricked out, gentrified, evicted, granite countertop, condos that I used to know the residents of. So, I mean, it may be high resource, some amalgamation, but when you actually walk it, it looks like a pretty ethnically and income diverse neighborhood.
Thank you, President Peskin, and I will go walk with you anytime. I love your neighborhood. We'll turn it over to Supervisor Engardio. I just wanted to say is there was a little bit of miscommunication with Supervisor Mandelman, who also has requested an amendment, which I've already agreed to, which is to respect the special use district, the central, SUD that he created to prevent monster homes from being built in that area of the Castro and the Corona Heights. So the amendment, which is not ready today, unfortunately, will have to be included next week. I do not think that needs re-referral, but basically, it will say that if there is a unit that's proposed that goes above the 3,000 square foot per unit, which is what the SUD currently reads, it will automatically, go to the SUD language rather than fall under this, and that keeps the SUD intact to prevent the monster homes from being built, which also is counter to the, the mission and values of this legislation. So with that, I will turn it over to Supervisor Engardio.
Thank you, Chair Melgar, and Supervisors Peskin and Preston. I want to thank my West Side colleague, Supervisor Melgar, for drafting this comprehensive and thoughtful piece of legislation over the past several months. Her proposal is an important step towards creating more housing on the West Side. It specifically tries to accommodate the needs of multi-generational families, seniors looking to downsize from their single-family homes, and first-time homeowners hoping to create a nest egg for their children. A century ago, beautiful 5- and 6-story apartment buildings from the Art Deco era were commonplace, and we see them along West Portal Avenue, Hayes, and Irving Street. San Francisco built multifamily housing until the 1970s, but since then, we've implemented zoning laws that limited most neighborhoods to single-family homes. So Supervisor Melgar's proposal puts forth straightforward and good government improvements to our housing development process. It empowers our planners to review and process permit applications for code-compliant projects that are already exempt from environmental review. It clarifies height limits and allows for more modest increases in density as permitted under state law without destroying neighborhood character. Most importantly, it creates strict requirements to protect existing tenants from displacement. A few years ago, my husband and I went to Paris, and we walked down the tree-lined streets and enjoyed the sidewalk cafes, but we barely noticed that there were 6-story apartment buildings everywhere, and we didn't leave Paris thinking it was a terrible place because of all that housing density. I only remembered the wonderful ground floor bistros and not the building height. So I want to bring that spirit of Paris to San Francisco. And we're always going to be uniquely San Francisco, but we don't have enough housing for our teachers, first responders, and the next generation of families. And that's because we haven't built enough housing to match decades of demand. And that results in something sad. I mean, what happens when people want to get married and have a kid? Too often they have to move out of San Francisco, and we have to say goodbye to our family and friends. And seniors don't get to see their adult children and grandchildren. So that's why we need to embrace some more housing density and let homeowners build additional units for their families. And to me, the 6-story building is central to a concept called domicity, short for domiciles in the city. So this was an idea created by retired architect Eugene Liu, and he's a senior, and he created something that his fellow seniors could benefit from.
And it's ideal for San Francisco's West Side neighborhoods. So picture active ground floor community spaces and businesses that anchor residential units above. And a good example is Gus's Market on Noriega in the Outer Sunset. There's 3 stories of housing above a beloved market with a fruit stand on the sidewalk. So we can do more of that with 5 or 6 stories. And on certain corners, I propose that we should allow for more 6-story apartments. And this is going to give seniors more options. They can downsize to elevator buildings and age safely without having to leave their neighborhoods or even San Francisco. It's going to help adult children and grandchildren of longtime residents stay in San Francisco. So imagine 5 stories of housing above a senior center, childcare, maybe a cafe or grocery that all the residents in a neighborhood can benefit from. So a proposed Domicity project, it's going to allow for additional height and dwelling units beyond what current height and bulk zoning allows. So Chair Melgar and members of the committee, I'd like to ask if you would be willing to duplicate the file to accommodate these amendments. I'd like to read the following amendments into the record. Add to section 249.94, subsection D, other controls. Additional requirements for certain corner lot projects, for projects on corner lots that propose at least 5 units under subsection C4A of this section 249.94, or at least 15 units for a 3-lot merger, or at least 10 units for a 2-lot merger under subsection C4B, the following requirement shall apply. The height limit shall be 65 feet, notwithstanding any provision to the contrary in the height map of the zoning map. The basic rear yard requirement shall be equal to 25% of the total depth on the lot on which the housing is situated, but in no case less than 15 feet. Each dwelling unit shall have at least 100 square feet of usable open space if private, or 133 square feet if common. Group housing shall not be permitted. The minimum bedroom requirements in subsection C5 of this section 249.94 shall not apply, and no units may be located in the rear yard pursuant to subsection D3 of this section 249.94. I'd also like to add for the record that the proposed corner lot topology will override section 261C, which requires added setback requirements for projects above 35 feet. So thank you, colleagues, for your time and your consideration of these proposed amendments.
Thank you, Supervisor Engardio. Supervisor Preston, did you have any comments, or do you? No? Okay.
Not at this time.
With that, Madam Clerk, let's go to public comment.
Through the chair, I believe planning has a...
Sorry. I'm so sorry. Ms. Flores.
Yes, thank you, Chair Melgar. I will keep this brief. The Planning Commission heard this item on June 1st and recommended approval with the following recommendations. The first was to amend eligibility criterion to also allow projects within the RM1 zoning districts. Number 2, to amend the density exceptions for single lot and lot merger projects to allow up to 1 unit per 1,000 square feet of lot area, whichever is greater from what is currently allowed in the ordinance. Let's see. Number 3, for the single lot density exceptions, also allow 4 units to be proposed within the primary structure. Number 4, for the lot merger density exceptions, require the 2 or 3 bedroom unit mix requirements that Chair Melgar previously described. Number 5, extend additional rent-controlled building and tenant protections through the ordinance. And lastly, the additional clerical amendments already read into the record. Chair Melgar already described I believe it's 4, or the majority of these amendments, which have been incorporated in the version in front of you today. And I just want to emphasize that the ordinance has been reviewed, and all these amendments were previously covered under the Housing Element 2022 Update Environmental Impact Report, or EIR. And just to further emphasize, all of the individual projects pursuing a project under the special use district will still be going through the CEQA or California Environmental Quality Act review. So there will still be CEQA conducted on all of these individual projects. That concludes the brief commission report, and I am available for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Flores. So we will go to public comment. I just want to summarize because this was a lot. So what we are doing today is incorporating the amendments that I read into the record. We then will duplicate the file and continue the original file to next week to give everyone a chance to look at everything that I just said. For the duplicated file, we will also incorporate the amendments that Supervisor Engardio just stated, plus the one that I just stated. And then I've circulated this, and it will be posted online. But there's one that I failed to, talk about, which is about the lot mergers to prevent any owner to merge with the lots behind them rather than on the sides. And that would be because we don't want projects that are through lots from street to street, because that may, mess with a mid-block open space. So that is something that also needs to go back to planning, and that is included in the amendments that we will make to the duplicated file, which, will be continued until, the planning, to the call of the chair, until the planning commission and the planning staff have a chance to look at it, talk about it, put it out to the public. So that's what we are doing today. And with that, we can go to public comment, Madam Clerk.
Thank you for the clarification, Madam Chair. There was an additional language stated by Supervisor Peskin on demolition, I believe. Was that to the original or to the duplicate original? Thank you. Noted. And welcome to public comment. Those joining us online should press *3 now. And those of us joining in person can line up to your right near the curtains. You have 2 minutes.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. Eric Brooks with Our City, San Francisco, and San Francisco CEQA Defenders. So it sounds like the amendments are definitely headed in the right direction. But I just want to get us back to the baseline on this to go through basic realities. One is that when we reached out as a coalition to get a hold of the neighborhood groups all over the city, especially in the west side, but also on the east side, and environmental groups about the environmental impacts of this legislation, none of them had been contacted. Almost none. I mean, one or two, the author mentioned a couple of them, but most of them had not been contacted. Those folks need to be in on helping draft this legislation, so we need more than just a week continuance. We've got over 100,000 units, if you add together vacant units, possible office space conversions, and what's in the pipeline. We don't need to build any new housing, so again, there's no housing shortage. Sure, we need to make it more affordable, but there's not an actual shortage. Just to speak to a couple of the amendments, if you allow people to build new condos, you're still condoizing. Those folks can split up their home into rental units that are more affordable, and they can take one of the rental units. One thing that hasn't been mentioned yet is that BlackRock and other big investment firms like it are buying up suburbs all over the country and gentrifying them and making them high rental areas instead of owned homes. And streamlining this too much like this with still too many waivers of noticing an environmental review is going to invite them in to take control of the west side of the city and turn it into what they're turning the rest of it into in the rest of the country. We need to address that.
Thank you so much. Next speaker, please.
I hope I'm not out of turn, but we lived in Oakland from 2017 to 2019. I live in the Mission by Cesar Chavez in Mission. After we got a low-income housing raffle unit, my boyfriend and myself, I found out from just living there and from other organizations, Party for Socialism and Liberation, and also from what I've seen and what I read in the newspapers, that between 25th and 26th Street, they're evicting some people. They're building an apartment right now it's 2 stories. They're building a building where only 9 units, so that they don't have any affordable housing. In the same block, they demolished a laundromat, and they're building up high income, I don't know, I think 80 units or so. Next to Party for Socialism and Liberation, they want to build condominiums. There were 2 tenants. I believe the owner is one of the tenants or the only tenant. So I've seen this gentrification. I wasn't here, so I didn't know about a lot of these plannings. I didn't come to the Board of Supervisors meeting about them. But again, I'm saying if it's coming down from Washington, D.C. to here to San Francisco, where the president is going to allow people from Central America to come that can afford to fly instead of asylum seekers that don't have the money and sometimes walk to get to the border to come here. I mean, this is gentrification coming from the top to the bottom. I read an article, you can read it online. It was Bancroft University of California on homelessness. They said 44% of the homeless in California are 50 and over. They said a lot of them could have been spared being homeless because they, if they would have had rent subsidies, if they would have had, now they can't afford. The average of those people that were interviewed, over 3,000 of them, well, 3,000 had the survey, over 300 were interviewed. They would have been able to stay in their homes if they had the money for them instead of for the war in Ukraine. So the only thing I'm trying to say, there's gentrification in San Francisco. Either this city is going to be a city for the rich or a city for poor. I've been in France, I've been in Paris.
Thank you so much.
But ya basta.
Next speaker, please. You have 2 minutes.
Good afternoon, Chair Melgar, President Peskin, and fellow supervisors. Ozzie Realm with San Francisco Land Use Coalition. I'm here in support of all these amendments, and thank you, Chair Melgar, for adding this to your legislation. I understand the importance of these resulting from your negotiations with the housing justice and tenants' rights activists, particularly because we need to protect the majority of residents in this city, not the future residents, not the ones that, left, due to the pandemic, but the current residents. 64% of San Francisco population happens to be tenants. And these amendments will go a long way in protecting some of them. We can't protect them, of course, from buyouts. We can't protect them from Ellis Act, but then maybe we could discourage developers from flipping these homes if they were previously tenant occupied. One thing, in particular that I'm really interested is single-family homes that are not one unit. They may be single-family home per assessor's record. They may be single-family homes as presented by the developer, but in reality, a lot of these dwellings in the Sunset in particular, they come with illegal units. And we need to protect the tenants who actually live in these illegal units. And to that end, I'm really grateful that you introduced, and President Peskin, you actually added the protection for those. But one quick thing, we do need to have notifications so we could actually stop developers who game the system and present these as single-family homes. So I appreciate it if you actually maintain the neighborhood notifications so we could be made aware, because here in District 8, currently we are dealing with 3 of such units, 3 of such projects. Thank you.
Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Lori Liederman. I'm a Inner Sunset resident in D7. I'm really happy to hear the amendments, Supervisor Melgar, that you've offered today, and they go a long way to addressing many of the concerns I had preparing to come here and speak today. I do still have some concerns which may simply be questions, but I think that while the goal of this measure is to build affordable housing, it still invites developers to buy properties, sit on them for 1 year, and then develop them into primarily condos, although they might have to preserve a certain number as rent-controlled units. And that will not produce any affordable housing. because condos are certainly not affordable. And the other concern I have is that we're already seeing developers emptying rent-controlled buildings through LS acts and buyouts and sitting on them long enough to qualify for condo conversion. We have one in our neighborhood. The removal of demolition controls is an invitation to accelerate that process. And I really do wonder what average homeowner can afford to move out of their home, demolish it, and rebuild while paying rent elsewhere. It doesn't seem like this program is really designed for the kinds of people that you're talking about. I hope that it is, but it seems like it's much more of an invitation to developers who will be fueled by speculators. And echoing what Ozzy said, I'm very concerned about the elimination of notifications. All these projects will have immediate neighbors who will be potentially significantly impacted by these developments, and there needs to be an opportunity for communication, compromise, and preventing problems from arising in the course of hitting somebody's foundation and so on. I think notification needs to be added to this legislation. So I hope that those amendments will happen as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Are there any members of the public that would like to speak?
Hi, Supervisors. My name is Dennis Moscofian. I live in the Inner Sunset. I just have a few comments. I don't grasp everything in this legislation, but I want to say that I appreciated the intent of much of the legislation and the care to which Supervisor Melgar and others have put into the legislation. But it struck me as kind of odd. There's talk about not enough housing for our teachers or other people in San Francisco when we have an extraordinary number of vacancies and beyond really anything rational in terms of even the housing marketplace. And I think that in reality, there's something else that bothered me. Supervisor Engardio's added amendments at the tail end of this meeting seem to undermine sort of the care which Supervisor Melgar and Supervisor Peskin have put into the legislation and the thoughtfulness of it. And I feel like this legislation, as it stood with the amendments and the care, seems like it was going in a positive direction. I'm not sure that it makes any sense to add an extensive amendment that would modify every corner in the entire Sunset, although I'm not opposed to all of that. But I think that I'm not sure that it's consistent with what your legislation is intended to do, and I think it's better to achieve something positive than to scatter it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your comments. Are there any other members of the public that would like to speak on item number 8 today? Seeing none in person, we'll move to our remote call-in line. We have 18 listeners with 13 in the queue. Let's take the first caller, Jaime.
Thank you very much. This is Michael Ryan. My kids live within a very short distance of me. Some of them qualify.
I'm going to pause your time, sir. If you can do me a favor and speak into your phone, maybe we can hear you better.
Thank you. Is this better? Is this better?
Go ahead.
Oh, okay. My kids live really close to us, and we have sickness in the house. So I really appreciate the value of people being able to, families to be able to stay together. But I think that all of this kind of legislation is based on kind of a false premise, and that is that the problem is not enough housing. I've talked to plenty of people who have been driven out and are about to be driven out, and they don't say it's because there isn't enough housing. They say it's they can't afford the rents, and that's really what the problem is. It's that it's not that there's too few housing. units or maybe too few housing units in the past. It's that the rentals are too expensive, and that's really what you need to be dealing with. Building a lot of additional housing could make for more affordable housing, but it would require measures that are far beyond what are being talked about now. And the rules of supply and demand don't apply here. Believe me, developers would never build to the point where they thought it would reduce the rents. That just wouldn't happen. So if we want to solve homelessness, we have to keep the review procedures that we have and not give developers more chances to
Thank
build
you so much, sir.
luxury housing.
We appreciate your comments. Let's take the next caller. You have 2 minutes.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, please proceed.
Okay, thank you. My name is Sally Tobin. I was a resident in San Francisco for 15 years on the west side, and like many individuals that I knew, I was active in founding a block watch, organizing tree plantings, repairing concrete sidewalks, and became a NERT volunteer. And I concluded that the strength of San Francisco is in its neighborhoods. And though this measure is being justified on the basis of people being able to stay in their neighborhoods, which I think is a fabulous idea, I think that this proposal treats neighborhoods badly in two respects. One is that by shortening the opportunity for neighborhood groups to provide input, it really introduces economic bias, because those who are struggling economically really would have trouble with a short turnaround time being able to comment on a project, whereas those who have more resources are certainly able to hire legal counsel and oppose things that may be genuinely inappropriate for their neighborhood. And the other problem that I had was, which may have been corrected by the amendments, was the reduction in CEQA review and environmental review, which seems to fly in the face of what should be a concern by San Francisco of the health of its residents, such as the effects that are being felt by residents of Hunters Point. So I think neighborhoods are a tremendous resource for San Francisco. I'm surprised that more of them weren't consulted about this legislation.
The speaker's time has elapsed.
But I think neighborhoods can...
I apologize for cutting anybody off, but we are timing each speaker at 2 minutes. Next speaker, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Jean Barish. I'm a Richmond District resident and a member of the board of the Planning Association for the Richmond. Today, I'm speaking on my own behalf. I very much look forward to reviewing Chairwoman Melgar's and President Peskin's amendments. They appear to significantly improve this legislation. Meanwhile, I've prepared some questions for your consideration for this public comment. Perhaps the amendments already answer them, but I'd like to ask all of you to think about the following. Is this legislation even necessary, since a state audit has said the RHNA number is inflated and data show there's already enough housing in the pipeline? Will this ordinance provide enough affordable housing just because new units will be rent controlled, with rents perhaps starting at market rate? Do condo conversions help provide affordable housing? Does the elimination of 311 and demolition notices help residents learn about projects in a timely manner? Will residents have an opportunity to review the designs of the upzone buildings that are proposed as part of the Domicity program to assure the designs are compatible with the neighborhood? What are the environmental impacts of demolitions? And finally, shouldn't there be full participation by all stakeholders, including residents, when such significant legislation is drafted? If you're unable to answer these questions honestly and with the best interests of your constituents at heart, please reconsider this legislation, even with the recommended amendments. Thank you.
Thank you much, Jean Barish, for your comments. Mr. Echeverri, next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, supervisors. This is Teresa Flanders, North Beach Tenants Committee. I am very appreciative, Supervisor Melgar, of your amendments. This feels so much better, as well as I really appreciate Supervisor Peskin's comments and direction of the map and what it actually isn't and what it is. I am very concerned about condo conversions of 2-unit buildings here in North Beach, and in fact, there had been a project before the Planning Commission on Varennes, which was a 2-unit building. 3-generation family, monolingual Chinese speakers lived in the lower unit, and the owner had actually first submitted plans that would have made it impossible for anyone to live there for a number of years. And again, it was using some pretty savvy techniques to get them out. And we then will be losing that 2-unit building as it being rent controlled, it being rentals. And there are so many projects right now that are for luxury condos in our very dense neighborhood, which is not meeting the needs of our neighbors who are being displaced at an outrageous number right now. So I look forward to a map that actually reflects the reality of neighborhoods, even with a number of resources available, but to reflect the realities of, the W.B. Coyles of the world, the Peter Iskandars, the Urban Green, et cetera, those developers who will somehow get tenants out, and again, with notices from neighbors who actually can reveal the realities, as you have seen in some of the different hearings, that we deal with those realities, that it is important to have notice and keep that. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Teresa Flanders. Mr. Echeverri, next speaker, please.
Good afternoon, George Footing. First, I want to say I'm very happy that Supervisor Engardio has time to go to Paris. Second, I'm a friend of Eugene Liu's, and we have talked about architecture, specifically domesticity. And one of the big problems is when you build a 6-story building, you have to go to metal. And that means the cost increased by over 20%. So if you stay at 5 stories, you're using cement and wood. I think 1-year occupancy is too little time. I think the city should continue to look at proposing legislation along commercial corridors. And I also think that CEQA needs to be noticed. Everything needs a 311. I would put it at 45 days, not 30. And I would let people know. This is just unfair to the public, and it's just a flight path for developers to not even get involved with CEQA. I think it's underhanded. So with those few things, I'm very happy for the amendments. I think that they did a very good job. I especially like Supervisor Peskin's conditional use, as it shows a lot of forethought and intelligence. So anyhow, with that, have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your comments. Let's take the next speaker, please.
Eileen Bogan with Speak. There was no outreach to D4 or to the CSFM. At the Planning Commission hearing on June 1st regarding this legislation, both co-sponsors appeared in person and testified. At the Planning Commission hearing on June 29th regarding the mayor's ordinance, the D4 supervisor appeared in person and made similar comments as those made on June 1st. This has created the perception that the two ordinances are companion pieces of legislation. It has not gone unnoticed that the two co-sponsors of this legislation were opponents in the 2020 election for D7. It has not gone unnoticed that the redistricting process moved D4 boundaries south of slope despite overwhelming opposition to it. It has not gone unnoticed that at the June 12th meeting of the Land Use and Transportation Committee, that the committee chair made a Freudian slip and referred to her constituents in D4. In Speak's written submission, the narrative was to amend the legislation to be a pilot project solely for D7. To be clear, Speak is insisting that for a carve-out of D4, despite the D4 supervisors' rookie misstep in signing on to this legislation. And finally, in 2018, MTC and ABAG convened the CASA Compact to address the region's housing needs. During a CASA Compact meeting, one of the committee members stated on the record that the problem is too much democracy. It is the message of this legislation and its co-sponsors that the problem is too much democracy. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let's take the next speaker.
Hello, my name is Tanya Randall. I'm the Administrative Director for the Marie Harrison Community Foundation for Social and Environmental Justice. I want to thank the supervisors for giving me this time to speak, and thank you to all the other speakers because I agree with them 100%. To begin with, we are constantly hearing the drumbeat of we don't have enough housing, when in actuality, there are over 40,000 vacant units still available. We have not met the goal for affordable or low-income housing. We are 35% of that goal, but the market rate housing is 158% of their goal. Restore all existing notices and hearings for environmental and community review is one of my asks. Add language mandating truly affordable housing and low income, requiring that 100% of new housing is for families making less than $80,000 per year and individuals making less than $50,000 per year. No condo conversions, no demolitions, because they affect the community at large. We need, right now, there are a lot of families moving in with each other because they can't afford to live here. So there are families, staying together, but they can't afford to live in their own unit. My daughter lives in Richmond. I have lived in the Bayview my entire life. But we need to house the people that are here now. There are teachers.
Thank you so much. Workers. Your time has lapsed, Ms. Rundell. Let's take the next caller, please.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. Jake Price again on behalf of the Housing Action Coalition. We are deeply thankful to both Supervisors Melgar and Engardio for their leadership in advancing this legislation to make Eugene Liu's Demicity vision a reality. Demicity is an innovative and scalable solution to building missing middle housing, which, as we all know, is one of the most challenging housing types to build at scale. And it accomplishes this by creating a prototype of housing that saves costs without sacrificing quality. We look forward to reviewing the proposed amendments today in more detail, so I will reserve comment at this time, but we are working hard to ensure that Demicity is a success, and we are trying to keep financial feasibility at the top of our mind as a part of this equation. And as Supervisor Engardio eloquently stated, Demicity being a success means a diversity of housing options that allows empty nesters to downsize while staying in their communities. It allows seniors to relocate to a more accessible home nearby with an elevator, and it allows more San Franciscans to stay in their city. Last week, I sent you all a list of letter writing senders in support of Demicity, so I hope that you consider their voices today as well. This legislation is an essential step in moving Demicity forward and finally having a real strategy to build 46,000 homes for the low and middle income households that we need to provide in the next 8 years. So thank you all for your time and consideration today.
Thank you for your comments. Let's take the next caller.
My name is Frank Noto. I'm a member of an Inner Sunset organization, SHARP, and I want to thank Supervisors Melgar and Engardio for leading on this effort. I've mentioned that I have family who were forced out of the city and others who are crammed into a one-bedroom room, and this legislation would have been useful for them. I also want to thank Mr. Liu for speaking to our neighborhood group in the Inner Sunset. By the way, there has been outreach to CSFN, which Sharp is a member, and the president of CSFN is also a board member. I want to say that this legislation is essential to implement Demicity, and it will create affordable housing as described by the supervisors, and it avoids displacement. I object to those who say we have plenty of housing. No problem, we don't need to do anything about it. Demicity provides a partial solution to the problem of underproduced housing for low and middle income housing, low and middle income families. We need to be able to build tens of thousands of homes in these income categories over the next 8 years. It's not a full solution, it's part of it. And this model fits in single family lots so it can help improve building efficiency and lower costs. Providing a diversity of housing options allows empty nesters to downsize, seniors to relocate, and more San Franciscans to stay in their city. Thank you for hearing me.
Thank you so much. Let's take the next caller.
Good afternoon again, supervisors, Supervisor Preston, President Peskin, and Chair Melgar. I just wanted to, this is Shirley Holmes Box. And again, I told you I was born here in the 50s and I've never left San Francisco. This is truly my home. And I just wanted to say that I appreciate the amendment. So I can cut this short by saying that while I concur with most of the stuff like Tanya Randall and a lot of the other speakers, which they have said, I wanted to emphasize the importance of affordability and what that looks like. But at this point in time, I need to review the amendments thoroughly. So I'm not even prepared to, make educated comments. But I did want to say that just like Eric Brooks stated, a week is not enough time. So I would appreciate if you guys would do more than a week continuance so that we could thoroughly review the amendments that you, looks like to me you've listened to a lot of us. So with that, I just want to say thank you, and please give us a little more than a week to review this. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let's take the next caller, please.
Good afternoon, Chair Melgar and committee members. My name is Carolyn Kennedy. I chair the Dolores Heights Improvement Club in District 8. During the past 7 years, our 18-block neighborhood of single, duplex, and apartment buildings has been flooded with more than 40 projects of single-family residences, which did not add a single unit of family housing, but just enlarged existing single-family homes. As of January 2022, D8 now has controls to limit the size of these single-family homes, and it's greatly reduced the number of monster homes. So we thank Supervisor Melgar and others for incorporating these controls in the family housing opportunity legislation. There's much that we like in this legislation. However, I'm also here today to urge the sponsors to seek a balance between streamlining and neighbor input on projects. First, we want to ensure that neighbors and community groups receive notification of proposed projects. It's only fair that adjacent neighbors learn about new construction before the bulldozers arrive, especially on our narrow streets and dead-end streets. And we often find code violations that planning has missed. So keeping us involved in the process is very helpful. Second, we seek a dialogue with project sponsors. Responsible sponsors want neighbors' input to identify design changes that can be easily accommodated and benefit all. Streamlining, removing obstacles, and striving for more efficiencies is important, but there's no evidence that public notice and CUAs are the main roadblocks to be removed. More can be achieved within planning and especially DBI by updating processes and technologies. The planning department suggested that block notices and building emails replace more comprehensive notice. They do not. We recommend replacing those with a single comprehensive online resource that's accessible at no cost to neighbors and neighborhood groups. Thank you so much for hearing our comments.
Thank you so much. Let's take the next caller, please.
Hi, my name is Steve, and I'm a West Side renter, and I just really support this legislation. Just desperately need more housing and housing density, and overall, I just really appreciate the vision that Supervisors Melgar and Guardia put forward for the West Side. It's something that's dense and inclusive and has a lot more housing. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. Let's take the next caller. We have 15 listening with 4 in the queue.
Hello, my name is Robert Ho. I am a member of the Mid-Sunset Neighborhood Association, but I'm speaking on my own behalf right now. I'm not familiar with the amendments that were put forth today. I haven't had a chance to review it, but I do want to state that I'm against eliminating 311 notification and the important environmental review that is necessary for any project. I'm also against any limiting of public comment, because neighbors, people who live in the neighborhood, who have invested their lives in the neighborhood, have a right to have a say on what gets built in their neighborhood. And SF Plan, if you want to eliminate log jams, work at SF Planning, but don't eliminate people's democratic right to have to comment. In addition, I want to point out that the voters had a chance to chime in on streamlining back in November of 2022. They defeated Prop D and Prop C overwhelmingly in Sunset, and overall the city was defeated. Please do not introduce streamlining to circumvent the voters, the voice of the people's intent. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Let's take the next caller.
Hello, my name is Christine Hansen. I'm a longtime resident of the Excelsior District, and I would ask, please do not remove the environmental and community oversight. Please keep that intact. Please do not take it away. The air we breathe in the Excelsior comes from the west, comes from the ocean. I am concerned about the potential for air quality of the neighborhoods to the east. Please also extend the residency requirements to 10 years. This will make it more likely that you will get what you are looking for, which it sounds like family housing, where existing residents are building out to give to other families. With your 1-year requirement and the home prices at roughly $1.5 million, it is very possible that a developer can purchase 3 homes at $4.5 million and then turn around and put up 12 units with very little review. Living downwind, the potential for unchecked air quality problems greatly concerns me. And it has been my experience that the more public input is allowed, the more affordable housing is put into the plan. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let's take the next caller, please.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. My name is Evelyn Posmentier.
First, I appreciate the passion with which this ordinance has been introduced, and now mostly the great care with which these amendments were crafted. Now I only have to digest them, but thank you so much. You know, I'm puzzled by what we have called a family housing ordinance that has, as I understand it, no affordable housing mandates. Admittedly, I'm not clear on the new amendments that Supervisor Melgar has thoughtfully put in, but I think that of all the essential workers who've already been displaced to the exurbs, and they spend hours and hours commuting into the city, and mostly I think of the public transit operators driving in on inadequate sleep. Do I want them risking their lives and everybody else's lives because they didn't get any sleep? I've heard them. Or teachers, the teachers who educate our future. This is extremely dangerous. And what about the 60,000 empty units, the thousands of units already in the pipeline? We need to add language mandating truly affordable housing, requiring that 100% of new housing is for families making less than $80,000 a year and individuals making $50,000 a year. And no, all with no notices to the public. What? Demolition in darkness? Who are we? We must address the right of the public to know what's going on. Thank you for listening. And again, we need more time to think about this, or not just a week till next Monday. But mostly thank you, Supervisor Melgar, for your thoughtful amendments.
Thank you so much. Your time has
I look
lapsed.
forward to the
We have 12 listeners with 3 in the queue. Let's take the next caller, please.
So first and foremost, supervisors, you haven't done a needs assessment. And what's missing in the needs assessment is you haven't reached out to the public. So you think you can just sit down behind closed doors or in your own den and speak for the San Franciscans, the constituents, the taxpayers. There are 71,000 vacant homes. In the last 35 years, the Board of Supervisors and the mayors have favored the big developers. And now you want to hoodwink the residents of San Francisco by having no public comment. This is a flawed way of doing business. Do not think that San Franciscans are stupid. The ones who are stupid are the ones who are sitting in the chambers. I've been monitoring this for the last 40 years. Stop hoodwinking the public in broad daylight. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let's take the last caller in the queue.
Good afternoon, Renee Jenkins, and I agree with a lot of the comments and public feedback, and I, excuse me, I am requesting that you guys give the community a little more time to review the amendments so that we can also find out exactly what the impacts of the demolitions will, the effect it will have on greenhouse gas emissions, as well as the forever air pollution and particulates, and not to mention the air, water, and soil that these should be in alignment with the climate action plan and all of the goals that we have set for a greener and healthier environment, as well as prevent gentrification. So we do want to make sure this housing goes to affordable and to those that have been most impacted in a negative way from all of the historical redevelopment and mismanagement and of money, as well as organizations and redlining. And so
I really think it's important to think about the ecosystem, the animals, the oysters, the ocean, as well as those who built San Francisco and have been longtime residents. Thank you, and have a good afternoon.
Thank you so much. Let's take, there's one more caller that popped up. Let's take that caller.
Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Robert Fruchtman. I just want to, give appreciation to Supervisors Melgar and Gardio for this legislation. I think there's a lot of fear around what's going to happen if this bill is passed, and I think it's helpful to bring up a number of salient points. San Francisco committed to the state of California that it would permit about 82,000 new units between this year and 2031. Over the past several months, according to federal data, the city has only permitted around 8 units a month, which is about 100 times less than the trajectory we need to meet our state mandated housing goals. We absolutely will not get to, we will not meet our goals if we continue on the track that we have, and that track includes neighborhood notification for every project, environmental review for infill development in high-resource neighborhoods. And the high-resource neighborhoods, I will add, are very real. San Francisco has some of the wealthiest census tracts in the Bay Area region. We have census tracts where households make over $180,000. That's the median household income. And then we also have households which are extremely segregated with extremely high rates of poverty. San Francisco is a very wealthy city in the Bay Area region. We need to do things different if we are going to resolve our housing crisis.
Let's take the other caller that just popped up, and this is the last caller in the queue.
Hello, Howard Wong, member of the Board of Directors of San Francisco Tomorrow. We are very concerned especially about the notification and environmental reviews. SFT has fought a long time to have much more robust public processes. When we fought freeways in the 70s, we weren't just fighting for freeways, we were fighting for beautification, affordability of the waterfront. When we fought for beautification of Market Street and started the concept of historic streetcars on Market Street, we fought for an affordable city for everyone. The Sunset started interestingly, as affordable housing and home ownership for many Asians who couldn't afford or were not denied access to properties in the Tony parts of the city. And now I think that there are, interestingly, some parts of the Sunset and the Richmond that actually probably shouldn't be densified, that they are pretty interesting, robust communities. I think the focus should be on planning, master planning, like the waterfront plans or the Stanton Street project, for much more higher affordability and some density, but not everywhere. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and that completes the queue, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Public comment on this item is now closed. Supervisor Preston.
Thank you, Chair Melgar, and thank you for all your work on this. And just wanted to share a few thoughts, and I appreciate the comments from a lot of the members of the public. And I just want to address I think at a basic level, I'm supportive of the idea of adding a bunch of units on the west side, and I think that seeing, as President Peskin talked about earlier, seeing West Side supervisors taking the lead on that effort, I think is a good thing, and a change from the past. I think that the question, as some of the callers raises, is always the question for us is like, how do we claw back or get some level of affordability? And I think that what I appreciate in this legislation is the attempt to do that and to gain some of the community benefits, particularly through having the added units as rent-controlled units, having the explicit and the amendments strengthening some of the anti-displacement language and tenant protections, and then also having some provisions to or make sure we're not incentivizing the kind of big real estate speculator nightmare scenario that one of our public commenters today spoke to, and that I will tell you, and I talked about this back when we were talking other legislation, but as someone that worked through the foreclosure crisis and after the foreclosure crisis and saw what the big Blackstones and others of the world did in communities where they literally bought overnight, 10,000 homes in one metropolitan area. I mean, that is kind of a nightmare scenario, and it hasn't happened so far in the smaller scale areas of San Francisco. We don't want it to happen, and so we're trying to figure out this balance of how we add to the housing stock, how we have some of these protections in place and mitigate some of the potential impacts, particularly being creative with adding rent control to these new units, and how to sort of incentivize some of the development we want without incentivizing a bunch of real estate speculators or global, or national firms that are going to come in and just try to kick everyone out from a neighborhood. I will say, representing District 5, while this legislation doesn't really impact in a significant way directly our neighborhoods, we also have a history where I think anyone representing District 5 is sensitive to how things can go terribly wrong when you incentivize mass demolitions, obviously with redevelopment. And I'm not comparing what is under this to redevelopment. I am saying that the protections, I think, are really key from my perspective. I also want to distinguish, and this is not a knock on this legislation, it is a comment, though, on our discussions about it. I want to distinguish the market rate housing and our goals in building market rate housing as a city from affordable housing. And I do think they tend to get conflated, and they shouldn't be. And I think legislation like this can help us reach our market rate housing goals by incentivizing some additional market rate units, but it is not a silver bullet for creating affordable housing. And this is as much for, maybe some of your constituents more than mine. I mean, my constituents are like eager to get high density affordable housing in District 5 and frustrated by the barriers politically that exist to doing that. I just hope that the discussion around taking a single family home, making it a 4-unit condo complex in the Sunset or areas of District 4, District 7, does not in any way distract from or draw from the conversation that needs to happen also, which is the conversation around large-scale, high-density, truly affordable housing in the communities, especially in some areas where there is land. And I want to be clear that while it's true that there are some built-out neighborhoods, there's also, and I know you're fully aware, certainly colleagues are well aware of the areas within your district that are actually available for development, and just want you to know that you will absolutely have my full support, and I hope your constituents will rise to the occasion of building serious amounts of truly affordable housing and not view these kind of changes as meeting that challenge, because it's really a different thing. And I think even in the best case, I think we all understand that that the market rate units that get created They may be available for the top 10% of wage earners, maybe the top 20%, maybe if the supply side folks are more right than those of us who see most of it as trickle down, and maybe it's the top 20%, the top 25%, but it's the top. The point is, it is the highest income and wealthiest people and investors who will be able to afford some of these units. And that's not to take away from the efforts in here to make sure through rent control and other measures that we are protecting from against the displacement and trying to make some of these places affordable over the long term for middle income and lower income people. But I just my observation is, as a board, as a body, as a city, we spend far more time debating whether we should have 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5, or 40 feet, or 60 feet, or what around market rate units, and we're supposed to not talk about, increasingly, we're supposed to not talk about the affordability of those units. And in fact, there's a drive toward having fewer affordable units because of some of the challenges of market rate development. This is not the place to sort that out, but it is the place to recognize that while we can increase density and do some of these moves with the kinds of protections that are here and that you're working on with stakeholders, just a reminder that is, at the end of the day, in my opinion, not as much a question about housing affordability. And I want to recognize, I mean, we have to, under the housing element, we all committed unanimously to 82,000 units of housing, right? 36,000, if my math's right, will be market rate, right? So this may help reach those goals. And that's a perfectly worthy policy conversation to have. But as one of the callers pointed out, the problem is we always have that conversation. We always meet those goals, and we meet only 50% of our affordable housing goals. So I know maybe it won't be officially trailing legislation to this one, and I know that I'm preaching to the choir to some extent. But I do think, hopefully we'll be able to have some additional truly affordable projects on the west side as well. And with that, just want to wrap up by really thanking you, Chair Melgar, for really your work. And I know you and your office have been meeting with a lot of stakeholders here. I think these amendments really go a long way and reflect that kind of deep engagement that you've been doing, and I assume will continue through whenever we, next week or whenever we continue it to. But I do appreciate these amendments, as well as President Peskin's as well, and appreciate Supervisor Ingardio's. I haven't really thought through those. I know those will go to, I'm happy to support them for purposes of sending them to planning, getting their input, and then we'll revisit them in committee whenever the chair deems it appropriate. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Preston. President Peskin.
I appreciate both of your comments and the public testimony. I was just going to say, relative to Supervisor Preston's comments, and we should just say this at every turn, this is in one of the recitals on page 3, the recital E, where we speak to the RENA numbers of 82,069 units over 8 years. We should just, every time we recite that, we should also recite the fact that 46,000 of those 82,000 need to be affordable. So, I mean, whether these are market rate, whether these are rent controlled, which doesn't necessarily mean affordable, may be affordable in the future if there's a long-term rent controlled tenant. But I just think this is a not substantive suggestion, but maybe we can add to that 46,000 of which need to be affordable. There was also another one that I think I understand what it is that the recital is trying to say, and which was the recital on speculation. There may be a way of saying it that this is recital O on page 6, or at least page 6, one of the versions. The board recognizes that additional development opportunities may lead to speculative real estate investments that may seek to displace current residents, demolish existing housing stock, build new units, and quickly sell those units. The next sentence goes on to say, to discourage such speculation, there may be a way of saying that recital to make it very clear that while this has happened, it is city policy to not have that happen, so that it's clear, like we're not stating that as something that we accept. Anyway, I can see maybe Deputy City Attorney Pearson will have some suggestions. None of these are substantive or get to the legislation, which I will read repeatedly between now and a week from today.
Yes, I know you will. Thank you, President Peskin. I just want to thank everyone who came and provided public comment. I appreciate the involvement of folks in these issues. I just also want to make clear that CEQA review is not going to be impacted by this legislation. Neither is the regulatory oversight of the Bay Area Air Quality Management Agency, district agency, which I sit on. That those regulations also apply to not just CEQA, but the demolitions and dust controls around them. So I will reiterate the motion, the actions that we will take. Did I close public comment? Yes. Okay. The actions that we are going to take today is to adopt the amendments that I read into the record and that President Peskin read into the record, with the exception of the rear yard unit, the 6-unit on corner lots, and the through lot amendment. And that we are going to put in the duplicated file, which I will continue to the call of the chair because that still has to go to the Planning Commission. And the original file, as amended, I will make a motion to continue it until next week.
All right, let's take those separately. So on the amendment, as stated by Supervisor Melgar, Supervisor Peskin?
Aye.
Peskin, aye. Supervisor Preston? Preston, aye. Supervisor Melgar?
Aye.
Melgar, aye. You have 3 ayes. And then the original was duplicated as amended, and then the original was continued as amended to next week's meeting, moved by Supervisor Melgar. Supervisor Peskin?
I have to do my amendment.
With the demolition.
Okay, that's in there. Okay, aye.
Peskin, aye. Supervisor Preston? Preston, aye. Supervisor Melgar?
Aye.
Melgar, aye. You have 3 ayes. And then on the duplicate, add the Supervisor Engardio's amendments as well as the lot merger language added by Supervisor Melgar. And on that motion, Supervisor...
Wait, and the rear unit, yeah.
Rear,
okay.
yes.
Yes.
And on that motion, Supervisor Peskin?
Aye.
Peskin, aye. Supervisor Preston? Preston, aye. Supervisor Melgar?
Aye.
Melgar, aye. You have 3 ayes. And then to continue the duplicate to the call of the chair as amended, and it will be re-referred by the clerk's office. Supervisor Peskin?
Aye.
Peskin, aye. Supervisor Preston? Preston, aye. Supervisor Melgar?
Aye.
Melgar, aye. You have 3 ayes.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Do we have any other items for consideration, Madam Clerk?
That completes the business today.
Great. Thank you. We are adjourned.